Aloha, everyone. Welcome to today's December 12th regular board meeting of the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. Before we start today, I'd like to go over some virtual meeting regulations required by law. Board members attending any board meeting remotely must be visible to the public to be considered present and meet quorum guidelines. Board members participating remotely must also disclose their location and anyone present at their location during roll call. The public is allowed to attend the Board of Water Supply board meeting here at the BWS service building located at 630 South Beretania Street. And we already have the most people that we've had in quite a while with testifiers already here in our gallery in the boardroom. Masks are optional. Before we proceed with roll call, it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome our newest board member, ex officio Edwin Sniffen, from Director of the Department of Transportation, State of Hawaii.
Thank you very much.
Let's take a moment to take a roll call of the board members. When I call your name, please say aye. Vice Chair Kapoa-Spro?
Aye.
And Kapoa, are you
Yes, let me make my
Today?
required disclosures. I am working remotely today from my home office, and I'm alone in the office and my door is closed.
Thank you. Board member Naalehu Anthony is here in the boardroom, along with board members Jonathan Kaneshiro, board member Don Sevchek, and of course, board member Ed Sniffen. All right, board people who are calling or video conferencing in, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. If you should have a question, comment, or wish to enter a motion or second the motion on an action item, please unmute your mic and identify yourself before continuing to speak. If you encounter technical issues during today's meeting, please use the chat to send a direct message to our support team. Their names are listed in the message to all participants. To open the chat window, please click or tap on the text bubble icon toolbar. Also in the room with us today are our manager, Ernest Lau.
Hello.
Deputy Manager Erwin Kawata. Board Secretary Joy Cruz Achu.
Hi.
Madam Secretary Deanna Tyson. And Information Specialist Stephen Nordstrom.
Hello.
Joining us by Zoom are Jeff Lau and Jessica Wong, both from the City and County Corporation Council Department. We also have Information Specialist Wayne Maria. Okay, testimony for today's meeting. A few options existed. We accepted written testimony, which we have a voluminous stack today. We have oral testimony, which we'll accept remotely as well as in person during the meeting. Pre-registration is strongly encouraged to facilitate as much remote and in-person testimony as reasonably possible during the time allotted. Testifiers should consider also submitting a written version of their oral testimony if they have not already done so. To testify remotely by phone or video using the Zoom video conferencing platform, please submit your requests by email to board@hbws.org. I'll repeat that, board, B-O-A-R-D, @hbws.org. You can also request it online at boardofwatersupply.com/testimony. Once confirmed as registered, testifiers will receive an email containing the links and instructions to join the Zoom session. To testify in person here at our public service building on 630 Beretania Street, please pre-register by submitting your request. And if possible, as well, And we do have a representative downstairs who is ready to provide intake and provide further directions. All testifiers will have 2 minutes to state their position. A timekeeper will alert you when you have 1 minute and 30 seconds left to wrap up your comments. When the 2 minutes are up, we respectfully request that you end to allow room for the next testifier. Meeting materials for this meeting under HRS section 93-7.5 are accessible at www.boilerwatersupply.com/board meetings. You can also view today's meeting via live streaming on our website at www.boardofwatersupply.com/live. Before beginning today's regular meeting, I'd like to state that our mission, that our board is dedicated to providing safe, dependable, and affordable supply of water now and into the future. We have 2 items on our action agenda today. First is the approval of the minutes of the public hearing held on November 28, 2022. Members, I hope you've had a chance, an opportunity to review the minutes. And I'd like to now entertain a motion to approve.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the public hearing held on November 28, 2022, a copy of which is in your packets today. Are there any corrections, additions, amendments, or any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. Actually, Madam Secretary, Board Secretary, roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Capospro,
Aye.
Board Member Nalegu Anthony,
Aye.
Board Member Jonathan Kanashiro,
Aye.
Board Member John Sepchek, abstain. Board Member Ed Sniffen,
Mr. Chair, I'll have to abstain.
Thank you.
and Chair Brian Zaya.
Aye.
Chair motion passes with 4 ayes and 2 abstentions.
Thank you very much. Please note for the record. Moving on to our next item requiring board action is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held on November 28, 2022. So the first item for action was for the minutes of the public hearing. These are now the minutes of the regular meeting, which immediately followed our public hearing on November 28th. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, any second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the regular meeting held on November 28th. Is there any corrections, additions, or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, or actually Board Secretary, roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Capospro,
Aye.
Board Member Nalegu Anthony,
Aye.
Board Member Jonathan Kanashiro,
Aye.
Board Member John Sepchek. Aye. Board Member Edwin Sniffen,
Abstain.
Chair Brian Zaya.
Aye.
Chair motion passes with 5 ayes and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Please note for the record. We'll now move on to the items for information. First up is the status update of groundwater levels at all index stations. Chair recognizes Mr. Barry Usagami.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Hello. We have 5 aquifer index stations in low groundwater condition for November. Kamaki, Pearl City, Pu'ulunui, and Wailua are in caution status, and Pu'ulunui is in alert still, but is rising. The monthly production is 136 million gallons per day. And we have a rainfall of 51% of normal for November, but the 6-month moving average or 5-month moving average is 70%. There are zero drought to moderate drought conditions moving southwest to northwest Oahu. The National Weather Service is forecasting above normal precipitation through February. So it looks like it's going to be a wet winter, which is a good thing. And the monitoring wells exhibiting stable to increasing head levels for the month. So if you could just scroll down to Honolulu, it's like second to the last page. There. I just wanted to show you Honolulu. The head levels on the right side of the top graph are moving up. So rainfall continues. We should be out of the alert stage the next couple of months. The rainfall graph at the end. So when the 5-month moving average is 70%, it's going to be depressed, but we'll hopefully see the average start moving up through the winter months. And then production, if you scroll on to that, well below right at the five-year monthly average, lower than last year. So all indicators are looking promising for this month. That's all I have. Open for any questions.
Members, any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the report.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, Gary.
All right, next item for information is the water main repair report for November 2022. Chair recognizes Mr. Jason Mikaitis.
Hi, good afternoon, board chair and members. The following is the report for November 2022. In November, we had 29 main breaks, which is consistent with previous years. This brings us to a total to date of 100 and I think 2 slides up, Joy.
Yeah, Joey, you have to go.
There we go.
Thank you.
So 29 main breaks in November, bringing us to 170 total fiscal year to date. And you can see from the bottom graph, that is about where we were previous years. This is a list of our 29 main breaks. All of them were on smaller diameter pipes. And for our leak detection, we investigated 19 points of interest and found 39 leaks, bringing us a total fiscal year to date of 233 leaks found. That concludes my report.
Jason, could you,
Yes.
since we have a new board member, Ed Sniffen from the Department of Transportation, could you explain what a POI is and how we use the satellite technology?
Okay, so we have a contract with a third-party vendor, and we get satellite information from them, and which is good to maybe about 300-foot radius, and that kind of focuses on where we do our investigations on. And basically, what that company is looking for with the satellite is chlorinated water within the groundwater or near the surface. So from that, they can give us a list of areas to investigate, and from there we send boots on the ground with our leak detection team to investigate each area.
So thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Jason.
Okay.
All right, members, any questions for Mr. Nikaido?
Chair, just comment for me. Just really appreciate Mr. Nikaido and his staff. When there are breaks on the system, their coordination between all the state and county agencies. So really appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's also mutual. We appreciate the DOT for quite a number of years right now, close coordination with you, Ed, and with your team. It's really appreciated. Mahalo.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much for the
Thank you.
report.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. All right, we now have our third and final item for information. This is the United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, as well as the Hawaii Department of Health, the DOH, discussing the setting of environmental action levels and the aqueous film forming foam, or AFFF, fire suppressant spill at the Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility. Manager Lau?
Thank you, Chair. We, unfortunately, I think we do have one EPA official. Could you come up and just introduce yourself to the group here? The rest of the EPA officials are actually participating remotely. And we also have the Department of Health, but they're also remote too. I don't see any DOHers.
No, I don't think so. I'm not a speaker today. I'm just listening in. I wanted to meet some members of the public. But my name is Dominique Smith. I'm the Environmental Justice Community Engagement Coordinator for EPA in Red Hill. So nice to meet you all. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks for coming out.
Of course.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Thank you for coming in person.
Thank you.
Chair, it may be good just for the public's benefit too, and for the boards, that we start with introductions on the EPA and then maybe move to the state of health.
Okay.
Okay,
Please proceed.
okay, maybe we can start with Allison or
Sure, I can begin and then I'll hand it
Yeah.
over to the different members of EPA who are joining for the call today. So good,
Thank you.
good evening, everybody. Good afternoon for folks in DOH and Board of Water Supply and members of the public who are joining for today's meeting. My name is Allison Fong. I am the Acting Assistant Director for the RCRA branch. And I'm joined by others from EPA today on the call. I'll turn it over to Corinne Lai to introduce herself, then Patrick Wilson, and then lastly, Wayne Praskins. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Corinne Lai, and I am out of the EPA Region 9 Pacific Southwest office. And my role there is oversight of all the authorized federal drinking water programs out of Region 9's jurisdiction. I will pass it on to Patrick.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Members of the Board of Water Supply, and a special hello to both Ernest and Irwin. My name is Patrick Wilson. I'm a senior regional toxicologist with the Environmental Protection Agency's Region 9 office in San Francisco. I've been a toxicologist with the agency for 27 years now and the senior regional toxicologist for the last 22. And I'm going to pass it on to one of my colleagues, Wayne Praskins. It's nice to see you all.
This is Wayne Praskins. I'm also based in San Francisco in EPA Region 9 and one of the members of the EPA Red Hill team. I'm the lead member for the environmental oversight work at Red Hill. Happy to be here this afternoon.
Thank you. Was there anybody else from the EPA or this is the team?
I believe this is everybody from the EPA.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can move on now to the State Department of Health. Can somebody from the DOH, State DOH start off? I'm not sure who's here, if Kathy Ho or Joanna Cito or whoever else might be here. Go ahead. Oh, Dennis, you want to start?
Dennis Lopez, Safe Drinking Water Branch.
Hi, good afternoon. Joanna Cito, Environmental Management Division Chief. And if I could have the host release my video for future. Thank you. And then
Diana Felton, I'm a medical toxicologist with the Department of Health.
No, you're just introducing yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roger Brewer with the Hawaii Department of Health. I'll be back in a minute to give a few more details.
Good morning, I'm Phoenix Grange. I lead the environmental group for the Department of Health, and I'm here in listening mode, but available for questions. Thank you. Unable to start my video.
I'm sorry, Joanna, can you repeat that, please?
The host has stopped my video. If you could, for my number.
Oh, okay. Can we allow Joanna to share? Joanna, you'll have the PowerPoint presentation for the meeting?
Yes, I do.
Okay. After the meeting's over, could you send us a copy because we never received a copy in advance?
Yes, Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate it. Go ahead and let Joanna share, please.
I'm sharing. Thank you.
Okay. We still don't see your screen yet.
Because I haven't started sharing my screen yet.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joanna. I won't push you any faster.
To thank the Board of Water Supply for the invitation to present on these topics. We are going to share with you the increase in drinking water action level for TPH associated with the JP5. We're going to discuss the drinking water health action levels for polyaromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, and then advise on the health significance of the PAH levels detected in DH43. We'll start with Roger Brewer of the Department of Health, followed by Diana Felton, also of Department of Health, and then Patrick Wilson of EPA.
Hey, thanks. My name is Roger Brewer. I call myself a senior environmental scientist with the Department of Health. I actually started about the same time Patrick Wilson did 7 years ago, or a little bit more here. Patrick and I have been working together for quite a number of years, along with other people in US EPA. My background is a PhD actually in geology. On paper, I'm a toxicologist with the Department of Health, because they don't necessarily have a geologist position in the section I'm in now. I'm actually a risk assessor, not necessarily a toxicologist. Dr. Diana Felton is a toxicologist. You know, a toxicologist, they review different studies and things and determine levels of different contaminants that are above those levels, they pose a potential health risk. What I do as a risk assessor is I look at exposure of people and set action levels to where when you're above these action levels, or above a certain amount of exposure that exceeds these levels that toxicologists develop, then we need to look at it in more detail, just to explain that. So, also, I'd point out I actually I live in Salt Lake, so I'm very familiar with the Red Hill facility. I go biking up along Lua Valley pretty much every weekend. So I'm intimately familiar with it, very much aware of the issues there. And we could smell the vapors in November last year when the release occurred. So I'm quite tied to it. So the topics in the Board of Water Supply letter was sent to us, I'll be reviewing. First, review the increase in drinking water action level for PPH, which I helped develop, associated with JP jet fuel from 211 micrograms per liter 266 micrograms per liter. These are in parts per billion. So in terms of parts per billion, the numbers aren't that different, but we'll explain that. Also discuss drinking water health action levels for polyaromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. And then third is advice on the health significance of PAH levels detected in the water supplies TH43, which is in Lua Valley. A few references for someone who wants to get into the details. I'm always glad to discuss this with you one-on-one as you're interested. First is our office's environmental action level document, which I oversee preparation of, evaluation of environmental hazards at sites with contaminated soil and groundwater. So these are action levels for hundreds of different compounds above which there could pose a potential environmental or health risk concern. The second reference, our office's JP5, is the jet fuel released at Red Hill drinking water action levels. You can see the web pages presented here also. Last updated April 20th, 2022. One thing is in the 1980s, oversight of petroleum contamination for the most part was delegated to the states. It's not the US EPA. So you're not going to find any US EPA action levels, such screening levels for TPH. So the states, we've been working together for the last 30 years on this. There are people in the EPA involved. We coordinate on these quite a bit over the years. And then the very last one, if we really want to get into the details on TPH, total petroleum hydrocarbons. This recorded presentation I gave to the University of Hawaii a few months ago, posted to our webinar webpage, along with several other presentations related. Some terminology, sorry to throw all the acronyms at you. You might hear these terms, you will definitely hear some. You might hear the term BTEX. These are 4 common compounds, especially in gasoline: benzene, most people probably heard of, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylenes. We go by the acronym BTEX. PAHs, we're hearing quite a bit about those today. Polyaromatic hydrocarbons, these are more or less benzene. Benzene is a ring of 6 carbon molecules. Polyaromatic hydrocarbons are just chains of these rings of benzene that are tied together. TPH, total petroleum hydrocarbons. So petroleum fuel, like the gasoline you pump out of the gas station, diesel fuel, or even oil you might burn, motor oil, they're actually made up of hundreds of different kinds of compounds. We only test a few individually, the ones I noted here, BTEX, a few PAHs. Most of the fuel is actually made up of all these other compounds combined together. And in most cases, I would say in my experience, is TPH compounds that really drive health risk more than BTEX and pHs. It depends on the site and what's been spilled. TPH is definitely very important to look at. Drinking water action levels, at the bottom, a few more acronyms. MCL, you might hear that term. These are maximum contaminant levels. They're based on toxicity for the most part. They're actually promulgated standards in state US EPA regulations. The drinking water suppliers are required to meet these MCLs in the water they provide to the municipalities. The next RSL, this is US EPA's tap water regional screening levels. Again, they're based on toxicity, calculated very much in the same approach, but they're not regulatory standards. They're intended for initial screening purpose only. And once you exceed these levels, you need to look at it in more detail, potential health risk. Our office's EALs, environmental action levels, they're very similar to the RSLs. And we also look at other issues. In this case, just for taste and odor thresholds, it's one topic. If the water is discharging into an aquatic habitat, into the ocean or river or something, we also look at aquatic toxicity. So they include or incorporate tap water regional screening levels EPA publishes. They also look at a lot more information to be concerned about on a more local basis. They're based on EPA's tap water regional screening levels model. I'm not going to go into this in detail, don't worry. This is US EPA's tap water screening level equation just for toxicity. You can see or maybe you can't, it's really a complex equation. It takes into account ingestion, drinking of water from a tap, also dermal absorption when you're showering or taking a bath, inhalation, vapors coming out during showering, use of a dishwasher, use of a washing machine and such. It combines all these different exposure scenarios together. And then based on the toxicity of the individual chemical, then we can derive an action level or a screening level for that chemical or in tap water above this action level. We need to look at it in more detail for potential health risk concerns. So a complicated equation, but it's, when you look at the individual parts, it's kind of like a car engine. It's not that complicated. Put it all together, it can be challenging. So these are the Department of Health's drinking water total TPH action levels for JP5 we developed earlier this year. We've had action levels for TPH in drinking water for 15, 20 years in Hawaii, not specific to JP5. Since this was it was very fresh when it was released, like most of what we look at in groundwater is highly degraded. And we wanted to develop very specific action levels just for JP5 jet fuel and specific to Red Hill. So first we started with toxicity-based action levels. The first ones we published February 2022. And using EPA's tap water model and standard assumptions, and we developed an action level calculated of 211 micrograms per liter. Again, specific to JP5 fuel. And this was based on the composition of JP5 fuel provided by the Navy, which has actually turned out to be fairly accurate since then. We have someone reviewing our action levels. They did the same calculations. They came up with a slightly different number. And we went back and looked at the spreadsheet I put together with that long equation in it. And I realized I'd put a parentheses in the wrong place in the equation. So once I fixed the parentheses, then it recalculated an action level, not that much difference. I mean, we're talking about in terms of parts per billion, 266 micrograms per liter. We're also carrying out additional testing of JP5 fuel from Red Hill as we talk. So we got some samples from Red Hill, sent it to a laboratory on the mainland that specializes in environmental forensics, as they say, getting more detailed information and data on it. So that was our final toxicity-based action level for TPH, 266 micrograms per liter for JP5. We also look at taste and odor thresholds. And this has been an ongoing, interesting discussion, again, for the last 30 years. This is at the level that we expect most people would be able to smell and taste petroleum in their drinking water. So this was our original level we published was 100 micrograms per liter. This is from 2007. This is from a US EPA document from 1980. Someone reviewing that document, where that number came from, discovered it was from actually a study carried out in the Soviet Union in the 1940s. This is how old some of this information is. It was in Polish and Russian. They got some translators, retranslated the documents, and the 100 micrograms per liter was a mistranslation, some information in there. And really, it's from the Soviet Union in the 1940s. We looked at some data, studies done in California after this time, and based on information that study for taste odor thresholds, petroleum fuels, and drinking water and such, selected a value of 500 micrograms per liter. Again, it's still parts per billion. This is really a small amount of jet fuel. If you want to put this in terms, something you can think about, this is I think it's a drop of jet fuel in, say, 50 liters of water or something. Above that, we expect people to be able to smell and taste it. This was interesting. This has baffled quite a few people. But the final JP5 EAL then was 266 micrograms per liter. We take the lowest toxicity and taste and odor threshold. Toxicity was lower than the taste and odor threshold. Get back to the taste and odor threshold for a quick moment. The surprising thing there is that the residents that were exposed to the jet fuel contaminated water, drinking water, were unable to identify the petroleum in the water at levels that had to be much higher than 500 micrograms per liter based on the health symptoms that we've seen. So that's interesting because it suggests that the 500 micrograms per liter taste and odor threshold is actually too low for a lot of people. This is something we're looking at in more detail. One thing, when you collect a sample of water from your tap or from a river, from the groundwater, or whatever, just to give you a quick idea of what happens to it, it gets sent to the laboratory for analysis. What the laboratory does essentially is they slowly heat up that water sample, and the different compounds, petroleum compounds in the water, will start to boil out of the water at different temperatures. Things like benzene, very lightweight molecules, they'll come out of the water at pretty low temperatures in what's called the gasoline range compounds. The laboratory can't run a single test to test that one sample. They have to run 3 different tests. One is for the more volatile gasoline range compounds, and then they run a different test, different analysis for diesel range compounds. They're not as volatile, so they have to run a different method to test that. And they run a third test for all the heavier compounds. They don't boil out the water until a pretty high temperature. These are called oil range compounds. So the total concentration of TPH in your sample, you have to add all these different analyses together. That's something we're missing initially when we start looking at this data. Total TPH concentration, you add your gasoline range detections to your diesel range detected TPH compounds to your oil range. And that's the total. We have more detailed information on this if anyone's interested. So that's the TPH action levels. We've been looking at these, like I said, for 20, 30 years now, with a lot of people in the mainland, including DOD, Navy, Air Force, EPA, and other states. Next 2 topics then, kind of related, discuss drinking water health action levels for polyaromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. And then third, advise on health significance of pH levels detected in water supplies, monitoring a well in Montalua Valley, DH43. So first, looking at the drinking water levels for PAHs, these are in micrograms per liter, parts per billion. You see lots of different complicated looking names. You see a lot of them start off with benzo, the term benzo, because these are just rings of benzene hooked together. That's what polyaromatic hydrocarbons are, PAHs, for the most part. Actually, all these compounds are. And at the very bottom, you'll see I put in motor oil. So regulatory MCL is where the promulgated standards, the states, municipalities absolutely have to meet these levels when they supply drinking water. The only pH that has a regulated MCL is benzoate pyrene. You see the stars beside these pH names. Benzoate pyrene, along with 3 or 4 others, it's only detected in one of the samples out of water supply well in Montalua Valley. They tested it. We'll look at that again in a minute. Then next 2 columns, you see the DOH EALs, US EPA RSLs. US EPA, actually, they publish a range of potential screening levels for a compound based on different concerns, different toxicity factors, and target risk and such. The DOH EALs pretty much fall within that range. You can see ours are a little bit different. There might be some slight differences in calculation. Among other things, that EPA RSLs assume that we have to also look at body weight sometimes. And I'm not sure for the RSLs for tap water, but in EPA's guidance, they assume a default body weight of 80 kilograms. pretty heavy, 176, 180 pounds. EALs, we assume a much lighter body weight, 55 kilograms here in Hawaii, because some people are smaller. They don't weigh 80 kilograms. That's why you see a little bit of difference. Overall, the numbers are pretty similar within the range of the EPA RSLs. So all these RSLs are based on toxicity, and EALs, I should say, except for motor oil and only DOH action level. You see the 500 for motor oil itself is based on taste odor thresholds. So there's the pH action levels, all parts of the building really low. Now let's jump to water supply, well, DH 43 in Waialua Valley. So you can see here on the map, the Red Hill facility is highlighted in purple. The DH 43 is that tiny dot to the bottom right of the Red Hill facility. And then to the immediately left, you see Alimanu crater, which was heavily impacted, obviously, by the release from the Red Hill facility. The golf course to the bottom is Salt Lake, where I actually live. And like I said before, we could smell the vapors at the time the release occurred. It was kind of a near miss for us. We knew something was going on. Here's not just comparing the drinking water action levels to what was found in well DH 43. It's the first thing we do when something like this happens is we look at the data. That makes sense, and see if anything jumps out immediately. It's a very quick thing to do. So one thing we've noticed when we started looking at the data, first off, is that all the detections of these PAH compounds in the water sample collected from water supplies wells was below our action levels, below the RSLs in general. So that was a good sign. They're not above levels which, according to toxicologists, can pose potential health risk concerns, for the most part, well below it. So that was good news at first. But something was odd with that. It was that we want to think more closely. It's where you start looking at the details and not just the numbers. Or we want to try to figure out what the source of these trace levels of pHs and motor oil were in DH 43. Remember, we're talking about parts per billion levels, pretty minor amounts. So the first thing that jumped out was a lot of these compounds are not in jet fuel. They're not related to jet fuel, but they were finding them in this well. So that we didn't actually see any compounds clearly related to jet fuel in the well, in the sample, I should say, collected from the well. And these are these diesel range compounds related to JP5 and such. That was one hint at first. And also the next thing was most of these pHs, these benzo compounds, benzoyl pyrene, are really sticky. They don't migrate far from the source. They don't make big, long plumes normally that I've ever seen in 30 years. A chemist once described these compounds to me as think of ping pong balls covered in Velcro. Yeah, they don't move very far if you're trying to roll that across the carpet. They really stick to other organic material and other particulate matter things in the rocks and in the sediments groundwater's moving through. So there's 4 potential sources of these pHs you want to think of. One was the Red Hill release, obvious source. Or maybe it was something inside the well we'll look at later. Or maybe some other source from in the valley or somewhere else, or laboratory error. The laboratory is testing these samples. Keep these 4 issues in mind. Now this is, if you're familiar with Waialua Valley, this is Aulani Street. Heading into the back of the valley, DH 43 is below those houses where the arrow is pointing off in the trees there. If you've been up in Waialua Valley recently, you see what looks like kind of fresh pavement on the side here. They were working on the road here for past year, maybe in water supply. It's either sewer lines or water lines. This road was cut up and open for much of last year, which is something to think about because we get heavy rains coming down the valleys. Then you get a lot of flushing, obviously water flowing down the roads and such, and the water is going to run into the sewer lines, but also into some of these open utility trenches. So looking at these different types of evidence, things, facts we can look at, think more about what the source is. Another thing that jumped out very quickly to the geologists here in Department of Health who've been looking at groundwater here in Hawaii for many decades was that the groundwater actually slopes toward Red Hill from well DH 43. So DH 43 is uphill in terms of water flow, what we can tell from Red Hill. So water flows downhill, and so that threw up a flag that Red Hill may not be the source of these pHs. Just one thing to think about. This is the schematic diagram I made of Waialua Valley. So you see these 3 wells, see Red Hill, Mountain Well. I think this was Mountain Well 10. The geologist here I was actually looking at. Piezometer in the middle, DH 43. and then tripler piezometer. Piezometer is just a pipe in the ground that is used to determine water level. One thing that happens in all these valleys that anyone who lives here is very familiar with, you get adiabatic rising. These clouds form in the back of the valleys, rise up and collapse, and you get these heavy rain flows that come straight down the valley. So what happens in Wanalua Valley, you can tell from the water well measurements in the DH43, the groundwater is actually mounded. It's actually higher than the water on either side, Tripler or Red Hill. So the water's up in a mound, it's going to be flowing off to the right and to the left, and flowing toward Red Hill, a little bit even toward Tripler, especially flowing down. So you get a mound of groundwater in the alluvium, sand and gravel that's filling the valley over top of the basalt. That's something, another bit of evidence, something to think about. Something else to think about is the design of the wells. Yeah, that's something, once you see the data and look at it, and let's go see how these samples were collected, they're really representative of the groundwater around it. We want to look and see how the well is actually designed and prepared. DH43, the well, it's what's called a piezometer, I mentioned before. So piezometer is just a solid pipe in the ground. It's like a straw. And you drill it down into groundwater like a straw in a cup. Imagine if you couldn't see the water in your cup, you could only look down the straw. Where the water level in the straw pretty much tells you the water level in the cup around it. That's what a piezometer is intended to do. One thing with piezometers, they're not well sealed at the surface generally. This one is 80 years old. It's been up on the side of the sill for 80 years. They're not well sealed at the surface. They tend to be susceptible to surface runoff. Think about all the rain and storms coming down the valley. Not routinely clean. That's something wells, they need to be clean when you collect a sample. So you're getting stuff in your water sample that's actually coming from inside the well itself. And so these wells over time will build up sediment and algae. Something to think about. So it's not intended for monitoring purposes. It's not intended for collecting water samples, looking at part fluidity and levels. Compare this to a monitoring well. Monitoring wells can be made of PVC pipe. It's very clean, very new. They're slotted at the bottom, so you can draw, water will flow in laterally from whatever zone you're interested in. They're also very well sealed intentionally well sealed at the surface to prevent surface water runoff during rain and such from getting into the well. Routinely cleaned of algae and sediment. It's called developing a well. This needs to be done on a regular basis because over time, algae will start growing in the well, sediment will start getting into the well, even though you try to seal it from the surface, you can point it from the sides and such. This specifically designed to monitor plumes and to collect water samples. And again, they intentionally designed to be very surgically clean inside the well. So what I want to do next is, this is some things that people in our office are totally familiar with. We actually have a video of the well. I believe it's supplied by the water supply. Bob Whittier, geologist in my office, gave it to me. He's not able to be with us today. I was reviewing it over the weekend. So I want to take a look at some of the videos inside the well. So this first video, I'm going to click on it. These are just screenshots I took from my phone of the longer video. We're at the top of the well. It's kind of like an endoscopy at the hospital. The camera is going down inside the well, and we can, if you see the lines on either side, this is galvanized pipe about 4 inches wide. Looks pretty good from right here, pretty clean and such, but we're about 200 or so feet above the water table at this point. The well is 275 feet deep. You hit water 235 feet or so down inside the well. Now we're down near the water table. One thing to notice real quickly, the sides of the well, you see all the brown is heavily corroded. That's not a good sign when you're trying to collect water samples inside of a well, because you're getting basically the metals in the well are starting to leach out. Now we're headed down to the top of groundwater. That shiny thing is the top of groundwater inside of the well, just like you were going down in a well in your backyard or something. One thing that struck me as I was looking at this is you see what looks like a sheen on top of the water. That's kind of shocking at first, but when you look at it closely, then the sheen is very brittle. When you see a brittle looking type sheen on top of the water, that's an identification of oxidized metals in the water. So it's precipitating in the water. And if you could drag a stick across this, it would break up very brittly. If it was petroleum, when you drag a stick through it, it's going to smear just like it would in a jar or something. So we've got a lot of metals dissolved into the water on top of the well, and it's very corroded. So that's an issue. Let's see, that's still another look going down into the well. We're 230 feet, 235 feet down now. Okay, another look. That's how we look at it again. Look at all the corrosion in it. This next one now, we're down inside the well underwater. Notice little particles floating around in there. That's not a good sign. It's probably algae, it might be sediment. Here's the casing. The casing actually ends about 20 feet down in the water. And now the rest of the well is down into the bedrock, it's into the basalt. All the blocky looking stuff at the bottom is basalt. So they need to case the well when they built it in the 1940s when you get the basalt, because the basalt's really hard. It's not going to collapse if you leave the well open. Whereas above, a lot of that casing you saw was probably through the alluvial material, gravel and sand and other stuff in the well, in the valley that's collapsing. So one thing to notice here, look at all the brown stuff, and you're starting to see some turbidity in the water. It's probably some sediment. All the brown on the rock is probably algae or sediment that's got into the well over the years. So again, not a good sign as far as getting representative samples from the well. This is going to come out in laboratory analysis. Even if you try to filter it, you're not going to get it all out. So that was interesting. Now we're down into the rocks. This last one here, now we're headed down to the bottom of the well, probably another 20, 30 feet down. If you watch the very bottom, all this stuff floating around here is probably algae breaking off the side of the well. That's going to bias your sample, maybe some sediment. And in a minute, you'll see the bottom of the well pop up. Going real slowly, but let's go a little bit further. There we go. Now you can see it. There's the bottom of the well, 275 feet down. You can see there's a lot of debris in the bottom of the well. Looks like the beige stuff is probably sediment that's collected inside the well. So that throws up a flag among all the other issues we talked about, the direction of groundwater flow, pHs in general, mobility, that this well isn't a clean well. So it's going to bias in the samples, your sample data that comes out of the well. It's just one of the multiple different lines of evidence. Here's just a summary slide I threw in there. But this, anytime you get data, it's one thing we've learned over the last many years. Anytime you get data, you have to look beyond the laboratory. You screen over the laboratory data initially, but then go back and look at how the sample was collected. And think about that. Was the sample representative of the, in this case, the surrounding groundwater, the groundwater outside the well to begin with? So that's where we are now, and there's still some open questions. We're still looking at this in more detail, but from the available facts that we have now, the contaminants that are clearly associated with jet fuel weren't identified in the sample collected from the Board of Water Supply well. That's a fact. The pH compounds reported in the well, they're not significantly mobile in the groundwater. They suggest a nearby source. These pHs we're talking about, they're also in asphalt, they're in road grime, that black stuff that gets on your tires and such. You'll find the trace levels of the same thing. You also find these same trace levels of pHs in the streams going through Moanalua Valley and streams in general, running off parking lots, even in the rainfall falling through urban areas. Same pHs are in diesel exhaust, among other things. That's one thing to think about. Also, we talked about the groundwater at the well. Appears to be upgrading for the Red Hill facility. Water generally flows downgrading, not upgrading. The pH 43 piezometer is not designed for sample collection tests for groundwater contaminants. And the well, you see rust and corrosion in the well, and it's got algae and what looks like sediment. So sediment could be even road grime and other things that have washed down into the well over time, or even when they were drilling the well to begin with. That throws up some issues. And you get similar trace levels these pages, again, in road runoff. Like I said, they're working on the road, heavy rains to be getting into the well. Sediments, rainfall from auto exhaust, asphalt, road grime and such. And trace levels of pHs are also a very common laboratory contaminant. I talked to some laboratory chemists as soon as we saw this. pHs were in parts per trillion. So super, super low, barely detectable. Laboratory chemists I talked to said you often see this contaminants from the laboratory. They use the same equipment to test samples from all over the US. They don't clean the equipment out regularly or very well. You can get part per trillion levels pretty easily. And then pHs weren't identified in follow-up samples from the well. So that's what the information we have now. Again, we're still looking at this. We're still thinking about it. But the conclusions from internally here, based on the other geologists that I work with and a lot of consultants who are very familiar with the area, so that's sample data from pH 43, not reliably represented the surrounding groundwater. And either way, the pHs are still well below action levels for drinking water. They don't pose a health risk to residents. This isn't a drinking water well. Again, keep that in mind. And one thing that this kind of highlighted, looking at this well, for me anyways, we need to make sure the monitoring wells we're using around Red Hill are routinely cleaned. So we make sure we're getting very representative and good data from it. The most likely sources of trace levels of oil and pHs in the well, the samples collected in BH 43. And again, we're still thinking about this. And internally, the other geologists I'm working with, that probably is from algae and sediment in the well. Oil, the petroleum you put in your car in an oil well is actually from degraded algae, from, the distant past that gets cooked and such in the sediment. So when you get algae in a water sample, then it's going to show up as, it doesn't boil very easy. It's going to show up in a high boiling point range. It'll show up as oil range compounds, even though it's just natural algae in the well. It could have been from surface runoff into the well during road construction or over the past 80 years. Or it could be contamination in the laboratory. These are the most pretty probable topics or potential sources of the pHs. Again, we're still looking into it, but based on the data I've seen a lot of data, probably from several thousand sites by now. This would be my conclusions, but yeah, we'll keep looking into this in more detail in the future. Thanks. So any questions, we'll save it to Dr. Dinas.
Chair, can we ask some questions before we move on?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Department of Health, can we have the previous speaker? We've got some questions. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to wait for it. Okay, we're going to wait for Diana to give her presentation on pH and toxicity.
Yeah, actually, I think it's better to first ask questions of your presentation, Roger. So we don't get too far ahead and then forget our questions, if you don't mind. If
Okay.
that's okay. Okay. I was going to ask Erwin Kawata, my current deputy manager, but formerly the head of a water quality division, to see if he had any comments or questions, or even come to the podium. Because I have a few, but I'll let Erwin go first.
Hello, Roger. This is Erwin Kawata, Board of Water Supply. Just a couple of questions. Number one, the samples that were submitted, we collected replicates. So we collected 5 samples after the well was purged. The well was purged at different volumes, including up to the purge rate recommended by EPA. And throughout all of those different samples and purge rates, we saw consistent concentrations of PAHs. So the question I've got is that if the concern has to do with stagnancy in the well or other extraneous items that it's a well, how did they stay in there after the well was purged up to the point where the purge volumes meet the EPA recommendations for groundwater sampling?
It looks like there's quite a bit of sediment and algae in that well, so you're not going to purge all of that out. Thinking this, if you watch as the camera's going down, I only showed a few clips, but the algae and sediment probably just raining off the sides of that well as you get down into the bedrock. So the more you purge, the more you're going to disturb what's attached to the rocks of the well.
Roger, the camera video was done prior to the purge.
Right.
So it was done initially prior to the purging. Now, after we purged the samples, all of the samples came out clear. So that's one. Second of all, the laboratory QC confirmed all of the different test results. So if there was a laboratory error, we should have been able to see it well ahead of time through the QC and the checks that was done. We didn't see that, and we replicated that several times. So the notion that it was due to laboratory contamination is somewhat suspect from our perspective in terms of reviewing all of the data, which we contacted the laboratory about several times, because when we saw those test results, it was, for the most part, interesting to us initially. So I just wanted to make that comment. Ernie, back to you.
That's a good point too, just to follow up, Ernie, with this, is that the first thing we do often is blame the laboratory. But in reality, most of the error we see with sample data, whether it's soil or water, whatever, it's in the field, how those samples collected. Again, like I said, we're still looking at this. This when you look at the multiple lines of evidence I was talking about.
Then the third question I have too is final question, is that Red Hill has a number of monitoring wells. Those monitoring wells also show the presence of PAHs in those monitor wells that's on the Red Hill property itself. So the question I've got, and a lot of what was being detected in Red Hill monitoring wells, including Red Hill Shaft, in terms of the actual PAH itself, matched up in terms of what we saw in DH 43. So And what was actually seen in the Red Hill monitoring wells also in terms of concentrations are not always the same. Sometimes it's present and sometimes it's not. So kind of saying that it was probably not due to any influence from Red Hill and is somewhat inconsistent with what respect to what we saw in the monitor wells close to DH-43 that's located on the Red Hill property. So I just wanted to kind of point that out too.
Yeah, so I reviewed all the pH data for Red Hill this morning. I looked at it before. That's another good point to bring up. And again, that's something obviously we need to look at. Hey, we're seeing this stuff in samples from Red Hill also. One thing, if you look at the data in detail, most of the pHs were only detected at a specific time as in March of last year. And out of the dozens of samples collected after that, they're all non-detect. So why did they all show up in really in one round of sampling? There were a few also in January of last year. That's a good question. So could it be from again, I throw out, first thing I always do is blame the laboratory again. It was a laboratory error. Maybe not, maybe it's the wells. I was actually at some of the wells when they were collecting samples. There's definitely sediment in some of the Red Hill monitoring wells. The well I was at, they had to try to filter it out in the field. So it's a concern that some of the wells up in Red Hill need to be developed and cleaned out just to make sure we're getting real data. So maybe the pHs, maybe they're there, maybe they're not. Let's get the wells cleaned out. They're definitely showing up in the samples. So something we need to, I agree, we need to look at in more detail. They showed up in one round of sampling and not in the others, especially in March, but not really after that. Would suggest it's not a widespread contamination of pHs under the water.
Return to you, Ernie.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Roger, you mentioned something about Red Hill. Did you mean PAH and Red Hill shaft was detected in samples taken out of Red Hill shaft?
In Red Hill shaft, to be honest, I didn't look at the data for the Red Hill shaft this morning, but from what I talked with other people, it was similar. I was looking at the specific monitoring wells. So from what I'm hearing on the side, they weren't detected in Red Hill shaft, but I can get back to you on that. I'll go look at the data.
I guess maybe I'd just like to point out there was an event at Red Hill Shaft in November, just after Thanksgiving last year. And then also the May leak, which is at tank 20, which would be closest to DH-43, maybe less, maybe about 1,500 feet away from DH-43. There's also, that area between the bottoms of the tanks and the tunnel where the pipes are and the elevation of the groundwater. There's still about 100 feet of unsaturated or maybe potentially saturated rock. And then, Roger, you mentioned about jet fuel. But what about all the other fuels that are stored at Red Hill currently and also in the past 80 years? Could PAH be present in any of those fuels? Going from heavy fuel oil back in World War II, motor gasoline, aviation gas, diesel, jet fuel. Is PAH present in any of those?
Some of them, things like naphthalene, methylnaphthalene are. We get into some of the details, like benzoate powering and such, you wouldn't expect. Some of the fuel, bunker fuel, you might be familiar with that the Navy and other people use. I'm not sure what they meant by heavy fuel oil stored in Red Hill. I need to look at the data in more detail, but bunker, I doubt they put that in the Red Hill tanks because you have to heat that stuff up to even move it. It's like molasses. So that's something I'd like to look at in more detail, Ernie, is exactly what the heavy fuels were stored there. But I don't think you're getting benzoate powering in such any significant levels. Have to check.
I guess that's my question is, are you saying, and benzoate pyrene is the one that has an MCL, that's the one that EPA recognizes as a human health risk.
Right.
So they have an MCL. But what about the rest of the PAHs that are there?
Yeah, so some of them, yeah, so they're, again, they were detected in one round of samples. They're,
so I just,
yeah, could they be in some of the fuels in trace levels? You're not going to see it in gasoline or even diesel, I think, not these heavy ones, benzoate powering and such. Maybe in some of the heavier fuels.
We're talking very low levels in parts per trillion too.
In the groundwater, yeah. again, the other things we look at, it's important to look at that, obviously, what's in it. But as far as back to DH 43, the other lines of evidence we look at to see if the pH is there could be related to Red Hill. We don't see widespread, consistent, these heavy pHs like we see in DH 43 from the heavy asphalt type things under Red Hill. The TPH is definitely there. We didn't talk about that. The TPH, even the oil range TPH, I think in DH 43, it could
We found
TPH.
TPH.
Something else. TPH under Red Hill, the heavy stuff, the TPH oil range is pretty clearly degraded jet fuel under the Red Hill facility. You can see it in the chromatograms. So some of the oil is what I would be focusing on, the heavier oil. Some of it is definitely related to degraded fuel. Could be jet fuel, could be older than that. Some of the stuff on the outer perimeter, it just gets to be a question mark. Is this from runoff into the well? Some of this sediment getting into the well? There's always gonna be question marks around the perimeter. But under the well, you're definitely getting some degraded fuel that's coming out. It could be heavier fuel in the past that's coming out in the oil range. It could just be degraded jet fuel.
So Roger, I guess maybe my last question is, and then open up to the board members, but are you saying that the PAH that we detected in multiple samples, like Erwin just mentioned earlier in DH 43, and granted it's not the most ideal monitor well, because it wasn't really meant for what we're looking at today, but are you saying that there is zero possibility that is petroleum based from Red Hill?
You know how science is, Ernie. It's never going to be 0%.
Oh, okay, well, how about very low?
If I had to put a number on it, then I would say 95% chance it's coming from something inside the well. How about that? Actually, intuitively, I'd say 99%. I'll back off to 95%. That it's something in the well itself. I don't think it was laboratory error necessarily, like you were saying, or it's coming. Some of it could be coming from rainfall percolating down through, Alani Street or something in utility trenches, but probably from inside the well. So really, in that area, if I'm not reviewing this as part of the discussion, but you need a better monitoring well in that area if you're really concerned about it. But as I'm sure you would know, right up front, it's not a good idea to punch a bunch of holes into your aquifer, especially in the middle of a street in an urban area. If somebody's going to dump something on the street, it's going to go down the well. So it's kind of a dilemma. I would agree to monitoring in that area, getting a good monitoring well. And we talked this morning about refurbishing DH 43 into a monitoring well. That's just not really feasible. It's been in there too long.
It's in somebody's yard. We don't want to do that. Yeah.
I completely agree with that, Ernie. So, again, like I said it 1,000 times before too, we're still looking at it.
I got a couple questions, check, if you're gonna open it.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have some questions from our board members.
Joanna?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh,
We have 4 o'clock today because we have some meetings scheduled after this meeting. So if we could continue with Diana's presentation and then Patrick, and then get 2 more questions, I'd appreciate it.
We can't hear her. We can't hear her.
She was Joanna was recommending, since they have other meetings at 4 o'clock, that we go through Diana's presentations and a quick note from Patrick, and then get to the rest of the questions.
Shares your call, but I don't know if there's one.
I think let's get through the presentation, and please maybe remain for questions as long as you can afterwards. If the questions can't all be answered, then perhaps we can correspond in writing.
I'm gonna come back next meeting, do it again.
Or I can come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of questions, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a question, sorry, Chair. I think there are a lot of questions, and I think it might be more helpful and more productive perhaps to take it segment by segment and have the questions. I mean, if we're not going to be able to finish anyway, because they have to leave it for, perhaps it might be more fruitful to have the presentation by Roger and then questions, because rather than going through all of the presentations and then just having all the answers in the next session, we might be able to have a more productive dialogue this way, but just a suggestion.
So I think we readjusted the timing of our presentation, and thank you for allowing us to move it from September to December. because of the availability of our staff. So I think if we could get through our presentations first, sorry, we would appreciate it, and then we could take the questions after that. We didn't allow for more than till 4 o'clock because that was all that was on our invite. But yeah, thank you. If we could let Diana do her presentation. Sorry, Chair and Vice Chair.
I don't think we put time on it.
Jeff, if I could just ask that these presentations move quickly, because I think there's a number of questions that we have with respect to just what the first presenter had, and
Okay, so
I don't want to burn the rest of the time presentation.
Department of Health team, if I could ask you guys, if you heard comments from board member Anthony, I think the focus is more on the questions. So maybe the presentations you can kind of get through, and maybe if you give us a copy after that might be better. But it seems like the questions are important to everyone.
Okay, yes. I'll have Diana do her presentation and then we'll get to Patrick. Thank you.
Joanna, may I ask how long each of the presentations are slotted for at this point, just so we have a sense of whether or not we'll even be able to get to questions in the session?
It should be about 15, 20 minutes at the max.
And then how many more presentations after yours?
It's just it's Diana and then Patrick. And Patrick has one slide.
And I think there's a chance that some of the questions may be answered by the additional information provided in the presentations. So it might help clarify some questions or even answer some that we may get through as sharing more information. So I'll try and move as quickly as possible. Do you want to share this slide? So if people aren't sick of acronyms yet, we're gonna talk first about in general about PAHs. And then there was also an additional request asked by the board to talk about the health impacts of per and polyfluoral alkyl substances, or PFAS. So I'm going to run quickly through these two very distinct chemical classes. Again, my name is Diana Felton. I'm a medical toxicologist with the Department of Health. And this is going to be a really quick overview of these two different kinds of substances, but it's going to provide a fair bit of information and background about them. So just to provide some information about PAHs, they're a group of more than 100 chemicals, and they're formed when coal and oil and gas and garbage and other organic substances are incompletely burned. They can be formed naturally or they can be manufactured, and they're almost always found as a mixture as opposed to an individual chemical. So these are the PAHs of primary focus, and this is from a health standpoint. And this is according to CDC's Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry. And the reason we focus on these particular PAHs is out of the many is because there's more information available about these. These also exhibit harmful health effects that are representative of PAHs as a whole. And you're more likely to be exposed to these PAHs in the environment than the others. So that's why we focus on these ones specifically. So where do PAHs come from? These are often called the ubiquitous environmental contaminant, and they come from all over the environment. So again, created when organic material isn't completely burned. So you see them come out of volcanoes. We're seeing that on the Big Island. Vehicle exhaust is a major contributor, as is coal tar. They come from petroleum products, from fires, they're in asphalt. They're in cigarette smoke, which is a major contributor to human exposure. They're also in lots of different foods like charbroiled meats. You overcook your burger on the hamburger, you're going to get PAHs in that hamburger. They're in cereals and flour and different processed foods. And then we also see them in things like medications, in roofing tar and creosote that they dip bone poles in. They're in certain types of plastics and in some pesticides as well. So these are really prevalent in the environment and created in a lot of different ways. So how are people actually exposed to PAHs? So you breathe air that is contaminated with PAHs if there's any air pollution. Fog has PAHs that people breathe. And then again, vehicle exhaust being the big one. When you smoke, and that includes secondhand smoke, you're exposed to significant amounts of PAHs. Eating food with PAHs as discussed, and then drinking any water with PAHs in it. According to CDC's ATSDR, the background PAHs in United States drinking water sources is 4 to 24 parts per trillion in urban areas. So drinking water exposure is a thing. So what are the health effects of PAHs? So immediately, these really have generally a low degree of short-term or immediate or what we call acute toxicity to humans. There's some evidence that really high doses of certain PAHs, like in a workplace setting, could cause skin irritation or difficulty breathing, but generally they have very low toxicity in the immediate setting. Long-term is really where the biggest concern is with long-term exposure, and the biggest concern is that some of these chemicals are known to increase your cancer risk or be carcinogenic. They've also been shown to be associated with some kidney and liver problems, and then there's been problems with reproduction and development, as well as immune system problems that have been seen in animal studies with long-term exposure to some of these PAHs. And again, I just want to highlight that it's really challenging to assess the human health effects of an individual PAH because they're almost always found in mixtures. So moving on to the carcinogenicity, this is a table, this is demonstrating the known carcinogenicity or cancer causingness of the PAHs of focus from the International Agency for Research on Cancer, also called IARC. So the ones at the top in red are probably carcinogenic to humans. That's where you see benzoate pyrene. The ones in yellow are classified as possibly carcinogenic to humans. And then the ones in orange are really not classifiable, meaning there's not enough information to assess their carcinogenicity. And so most of the human studies that drove these classifications were in occupational studies that were evaluating workers with large exposure. And they found increased numbers of lung, skin, and bladder cancers associated with exposure to PAHs in those occupational studies. So that's how IARC evaluated them according to their carcinogenicity. Moving on, when we think about the health risk based on the information Roger presented, the data we've seen, this is the way I really think about what an exposure to a hazardous chemical as it creates a health risk. And it's that the effects, the hazard or the health effects is really depends on the amount of the exposure, the dose, how long you were exposed, which is the duration, how you were exposed, did you ingest it or breathe it, how did it get into your body? And then there's always factors of personal traits and habits like your health, your personal health and other things that you do. And then of course, whether other chemicals are present that may exacerbate the problems. So based on the current information, the data from DH43, the numbers Roger presented showing that the levels are below the RSLs and the EALs and the MCL, and that this is DH43 is not a drinking water source. There's no health risk anticipated. And this will be more useful when the slides are shared, but these are just a bunch of resources that I think are really useful public resources on PAHs if you want a place to learn more. And this will be available with the shared slides, these links. Okay, so that's a quick primer on PAHs. And now we're going to continue the alphabet soup onto per and polyfluoral alkyl substances. So these are PFAS, and this was asked in the request of DOH to discuss given the most recent spill of aqueous film forming foam at the Red Hill facility. So a quick primer on PFAS. These are human-made chemicals. I apologize again for the acronyms in the alphabet soup, but these chemicals are very useful for waterproofing, for non-stick and stain-resisting properties, and that makes them frequently used in a lot of products, both personal and industrial. So there's thousands of these chemicals, and the naming and the organization of them is very confusing. We also often call them forever chemicals because they don't really break down in the environment, and they're very persistent in the environment in all different places. So when thinking about PFAS, there's really tons of uses of these chemicals. As you can see from this slide, they're used all over the place. And just to highlight a few, take out food containers, including the compostable ones, personal care products like makeups and sunscreens have PFAS, waterproof clothing, textiles, couches, and stain-resistant carpets all contain PFAS. And I want to draw your attention, of course, to the upper right-hand firefighting, where it says firefighting foam. We're going to talk more about that in detail in just a few minutes. So thinking about PFAS and how do these affect your health, there is a very growing source of information about how these chemicals impact the body. And there's varying degrees of evidence on them, but there's really a lot of health impacts that we're concerned about. It's important to note that the health effects do vary with the chemistry, so the particular chemical. And most of the research has been done with drinking water exposure, and particularly on two PFAS in particular, PFOA and PFOS. So those are the two that have been around the longest and the ones we have the most information on. I also want to point out that the NHANES study, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, which is done by CDC, where yearly they collect blood markers on large numbers of Americans. They've been collecting blood markers on PFAS in Americans since 2000 when they added it to the survey. And they found that more than 98% of Americans have PFAS detectable in their blood. So these are really a universal presence contaminant. We don't, like PAHs, we don't really see acute toxicity from these. In fact, if you drank a whole bunch of PFAS in a one-time setting, you probably would have no health effects. But it's the long-term, low-level exposures over long periods of time that we worry about with the health impacts. So
Mr. Chair.
There's been quite
We can
a bit.
summarize the background and really dive into the meat. I mean, I would say it's okay if they could give us as much time as possible, but if they're leaving it for, I think maybe we should get to the meat of this, if we could.
I think people are getting really anxious with the questions, so, and I think this material, we could probably read.
It would have been great if we had a read ahead for this, and I'd also like to offer that Erwin brought this to the board a few meetings ago, at least the first half of it, when we were talking about where these chemicals come from.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear details about what we know about the AFFF release at Red Hill, or skip that?
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Yes.
Okay. So the spill occurred on November 29th. Details and impacts are still under investigation. We are still attempting to get information from the Navy. The impacted soil and asphalt and concrete culvert around the area were excavated. There was no apparent release into Halava Stream. The Department of Health has requested extensive sampling and is collecting independent samples as well. And the soil sampling began on December 2nd, with the groundwater sampling beginning on December 5th. The groundwater sampling is including 9 monitoring wells, plus the Red Hill shaft. The samples were sent to a mainland laboratory and we're awaiting results of the samples. No results are back yet. The Department of Health continues to work with EPA and the Navy to delineate the full extent of the contamination, and the Department of Health and EPA will continue to monitor the situation and evaluate for further impacts on the groundwater. And next slide is just some, the next slide includes resources on PFAS for people that are interested in this topic. And that's it.
Should we just get the last presenter and then open up for questions?
Yes, I can introduce the last slides for EPA and then turn it over to Patrick. Joanna, would you mind pulling up the slide on the screen?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, does the EPA have to leave at 4 o'clock as well?
Yes, EPA also has to leave at 4 o'clock. We selected the time based on our team's availability.
Okay.
Guys work for the people.
Chair, if I could, if we don't get through it today, I would suggest that in January, we ask them to come back.
Absolutely.
We ask them to allocate as much time as necessary for the discussion and for them to also hear public testimony and concerns. But let's continue, Chair, Mr. Chair. But we'll put them on the, if you're okay with it, we'll put them on the agenda for January again. Thank you.
Thank you. So to introduce EPA's presentation, we were asked to come and speak to EPA's current drinking water health advisory levels for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, and also to speak to the health significance of the pH levels that were detected in DH43. We also were asked to provide an update on the AFFF release, which we'll plan to do. I will start with Patrick Wilson to provide information on the PAH health advisory levels, and then I will take the points relating to the health significance as well as the AFFF release. So Patrick.
Thanks, Allison. Folks from the Board of Water Supply, let me just check in with you and make sure that we're meeting your needs. I'm perfectly happy to discuss EPA's view of these polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. I'm perfectly happy to discuss our screening levels, but that being said, I feel like you've heard a little bit about screening levels already from my colleagues at the Department of Health. So I have a single slide. If you would prefer to have an opportunity to ask questions of both Dr. Brewer and Dr. Felton, I'm happy to come back and have a conversation with you about our screening levels, how they're developed and how they're used. I'm going to stop there and leave it to you because I know that there are a lot of questions that.
Yeah, Patrick, given what happened last week with the release of 1,300 gallons of firefighting foam concentrate containing PFAS, I think the PAH discussion can continue at a different time, but really want to understand what has happened, what has also happened in the past, because we received the letter from the Department of Health on December 8th, and thank you, Joanne, for sending that to us. Enclosure 3 of that letter seems to indicate that were positive test results for PFAS in the Navy's drinking water source at Red Hill Shaft going back to December of 2021. And more recently, I took a look at the water quality reports for Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, which they are required to do annually. And in the years 2021 and 2020, there are also detections of PFAS in their drinking water system. One of it was identified as coming from their Halava Shaft. And the other year, it wasn't identified as what was the source, whether it was one Red Hill Shaft or Halava or Waiaba Shaft. So it looks like the presence of PFAS in their water system is not unique to just last year's event. But go ahead, Patrick, if you can add more information on this. Where is it at with the investigation? What has happened in the past? And what do you know? Because it looks like the Department of Health knew about these results as early as March of this year. And they're in their November 2nd letters asking for additional tests to be done on possibly frozen or preserved samples directly from Red Hill Shaft to be tested for PFAS. I was wondering if those results are available, if you could share that with us today. I'd appreciate it.
Okay. So Ernest, as you can see, when we started the meeting, it was light at my house here in Northern California.
I fully understand. And I appreciate you folks hanging in there, because we have a room full of people that are very anxious to learn more about this situation.
Absolutely. Allison asked me to be here today to discuss the PAHs. And I know we have folks who are prepared to speak with you about the PFAS findings. So I'm going to turn it back over to Allison. And she's in a better position to address those questions than I am.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick. So both I and Karine Lai, the manager of the Drinking Water Office, can speak to some of your questions. Ernie, so to speak to the questions about the PFAS detections in December of 2021, PFAS was detected at Red Hill Shaft on December 20th and 27th. EPA and DOH received those final lab results on March of 2022, and the detections were below the state of Hawaii's environmental action levels, and the detections were above what became EPA's revised health advisory levels, and those were issued in June of 2022. So those new levels weren't issued until June of 2022. So in that letter, EPA and DOH did direct the Navy to conduct a preliminary investigation by sampling 4 monitoring wells that were in the immediate vicinity of Red Hill Shaft. And following the AFFF release on November 29th, there's more expansive sampling that is required of the Navy to conduct per the sampling and analysis plan. It calls for weekly groundwater sampling of 10 wells at Red Hill Shaft and 9 in the vicinity. And the plan appears to say that the sampling will occur for at least 6 months. So EPA and DOH will be working together to assess those sampling results and determine appropriate course of action. We do not have any samples yet. As far as an update on the AFFF release, EPA is closely monitoring the Navy's response and working in coordination with DOH. The Navy reported the release to the National Response Center, which notified us at EPA. And since that time, EPA's emergency response personnel have been in contact with Hawaii Department of Health and providing that technical assistance for sampling analysis plans to assess the soil and groundwater. And we would refer Board of Water Supply to the Navy as the source for the latest information on their response effort in the spill. So you also had questions relating to PFAS detections in the drinking water system. To that, I would refer to Karine Lai to speak to that matter.
Good afternoon, this is Karine. So Ernie, you made mention of water quality data that indicated detections of PFAS based on data or in their annual water quality report. I'm trying to decipher the data that you're actually looking at, because as we know, much of PFAS is a moving target with regards to where we are on the health advisory level, which we lowered about 1,000-fold in June. And a lot of the limitations around PFAS and what we're seeing nationwide is around the limitations on the analytical method that is currently being used. So lowering it from what had been in 2018 from 70 parts per trillion down to parts per, those 0.004 parts per trillion as our interim health advisory is a significant shift in terms of what's being detected and reported. And a lot of it will depend on the analytical methods being used and ensuring that the labs being used are certified to be able to meet those now minimum reporting limits. So we've got a moving target ahead of us right now that we're challenged by going forward.
Well, thank you, Karine. You mentioned that the limits were lowered by 1,000-fold. I understand, EPA is committed to protecting the environment and human health. What was the reason for lowering it 1,000-fold in June of this year?
Yeah, I think there were more data, peer-reviewed science and data, and have indicated that the adverse impacts from exposure to PFAS were more harmful than was originally understood. So we had been sitting at 70 parts per trillion since 2018, and based on peer-reviewed and going through our science advisory board, made a decision to roll out interim health advisories for PFOA and PFOS and to lower those based on new science and new data that we have.
So that was not a arbitrary decision, but one that was done to be more protective of human health.
Correct.
Okay,
and as you know, Ernie, we are moving very quickly toward a proposed rulemaking and a drinking water standard for both of those. So it goes hand in hand with what we're doing right now as we speak.
I understand that. Thank you, Karine. The data I'm referring to is actually the data in their annual water quality reports that's given out to all their drinking water customers for Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. And Karine, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't those numbers the highest level detected based on actual laboratory data for test results from samples taken from their water system?
It should be.
What is the law required to be actually?
Yeah, so the law requires that if you are undertaking unregulated contaminant monitoring, and again, all utilities there was a requirement in 2013 through 2015 to have all water systems sample for a half dozen perfluorinated compounds. If indeed your levels, your results were above the minimum reporting limit for that contaminant or that constituent, whether it's PFOA or PFOS or any other chemical, you are to include that in your consumer confidence report. And let the affected consumers from your water system know that the analytical results are available. And that holds true for any unregulated contaminant constituent that we require water systems to monitor for. I don't know what the Navy, so the Navy undertaking its own monitoring. And these annual water quality reports reflect the prior year's worth of monitoring. So you make reference to 2021's report, which means it's their.
Actually, I make reference to, the 2021 and 22 reports, which are taken from the calendar year 2020 and calendar year 2021.
Yeah. So again, under the federal requirements, they were not required to do any monitoring. So they were doing their own monitoring of the constituents. There wasn't a requirement. But the rule does say that if you undergo unregulated monitoring,
you have to report
that you are to report anything above the minimum reporting limits. And again, the minimum reporting limits prior to where we had the 70 parts per trillion, we're at much higher levels. So I'm a little surprised. It's unusual to see water utilities providing that information, because again, we've got a bouncing ball with regards to the analytical limits right now on the minimum reporting levels.
I understand that the interim health advisories are at levels below what laboratory methods can detect to, and that's the problem. But a 1,000-fold decrease is based on scientific data, peer-reviewed studies to say that there is a health risk here, and so the EPA, I guess, took a very conservative approach in setting the advisory level.
And it will be, and it's not unusual to have health advisories to be set at levels below what we can detect.
What is the timeline for the MCL setting for the drinking water standard for PFOA and PFOS?
Oh my goodness, everybody asked that question, right? So the agency had committed to getting out to releasing a proposed MCL for PFOA and PFOS by the end of the year. We are now sitting at mid-December. And it's, I would say, I'm not very optimistic that we're going to make the end of the year, but I would suspect that there's a lot of political pressure to kind of move as quickly as we can. And I suspect it's going to come out in January.
So I just wanted to maybe just point out in the November 2nd letter from EPA and Department of Health on the preliminary investigation of PFAS, the levels are comparable to what they reported in calendar years 2020 and 2021.
And those levels, I believe, are single-digit parts per trillion.
They're still single-digit parts per trillion, but well above the current health advisory, which is 0.0004 or 6 or something.
Yeah, I think it's 0.004.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, Ernie.
Thank you. Chair, back to you. Unless Erwin, Deputy Manager Kawata had any questions.
Excuse me. So are we done with the presentations?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Kawata, members, if you want to get ready.
Or just a question for Corinne.
I'm here, Erwin.
Thanks, Corinne. Do you have any comment on the current drinking water method for PFOS? Because its current minimum reporting limit is well above the interim health advisory level of that 0.004.
So that method, 533 and 537.1 are going to be used next year in UCMR 5. If those methods are only can get down to 2 parts per trillion, but the interim health advisory is 0.004, how do we interpret the results that we get in terms of its compliance or conformance, or at least consistency with the interim health advisory?
I appreciate that, Erwin. And thus, the challenge before us. And as I alluded to earlier, it's not unusual to have health advisories to be at levels lower than the actual method detection. We hoped that we would get more precise, but right now, as you indicated, nationwide, I believe the lowest that quantifiable limit is anywhere like between 2 and 4. So that's going to be the driving factor, as you can imagine, as we move forward toward an MCL.
So it's likely that the MCL could potentially be something higher than the interim health advisory, just based on technology or other kind of limitations.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Member Nalini?
Yeah, thanks you folks for coming on today. I really wish that there could have been maybe a little more anticipation of people being excited that the EPA and DOH was going to come, and that we could ask a few questions, that you folks could stay all the way through the testimony. And so, I'll try to be brief. I guess, in this, and this is for the EPA to maybe respond to, but when we start to think about this crisis, in some of the most simplistic terms, what we're talking about is that there has been an intrusion into our aquifer of several thousand gallons of material that shouldn't be there, that's harmful and hazardous and cancerous and really troublesome to our health, potentially. And I'm wondering if we can come to some sort of agreement as to what the testing regimen should be, what that period of time should be between tests, and the sensitivity to the tests and what we're looking for sometime soon, so that the data sets that we can produce over time are accurate, are universally held as something that we can use as these guideposts, if you will, to really start to understand what's happening in our community. And I will just finish with this and then yield my time, but I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that the scrutiny by BWS, by DOH, by EPA is really facing this idea that we do not want anything even remotely close to what happened in the Navy system to happen in the BWS municipal system. And I'd also like to hear in the affirmative that DOH and EPA feels that way as well. Thank you.
I would say thank you for that comment, and share that, we do share your concern about the potential impact of the spill on the environment. We're working to get sufficient information to understand the data and to work in close coordination with DOH on this.
Sorry, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. What I said was, I want there to be clear data intake at a regular clip that we all have access to, that can be utilized for the public scrutiny as well. And we're a year in, and I don't think we've done that yet. And I would like there to be an agreement. I mean, BWS has turned the sensitivity all the way up on testing, largely because we don't have the monitor well set that we need in order to understand what's happening in the aquifer. And that when we see a heat map, for instance, that says after a certain distance non-detect, what that is really saying is that we didn't test to the level low enough to see what there was. And non-detect in the community leads some people to believe that there's nothing there, when that's not actually the case. And so what I'd like to hear from you is to, again, agree to a cadence of testing at these available sites in and around the Red Hill area, as well as a sensitivity threshold that we can all agree on as the purveyors as well as the regulators, so that we can test in unison across all of our sites and have data sets that are somewhat similar.
Thank you for that. Yes, the Department of Health would like to share and receive collaborating data between all of the regulating agency, EPA, as well as the Board of Water Supply. So we would be interested in talking further with you about that.
I'm sorry, that's not what I said. And I would like an answer from the EPA, because when the Navy was in the boardroom, Admiral Killian, he sat right there, said to us they would test to the levels that the EPA regulated everyone to test to. So I'd like someone to answer from the EPA to acknowledge whether or not we can test to levels that are lower than the legal actions limit, so that we can get a better understanding of what's happening.
And to clarify, are you speaking about PFAS sampling specifically?
Alice, I think board member Anthony is indicating for everything that he tests for, that we look actually below the regulatory limits, because right now, and I was there speaking to the three admirals along with board member Anthony, and they basically are not going to budge, because we asked them, can they test to lower levels, more minute levels of the chemicals, because that tells us when the chemicals first start to show up in the groundwater at that location of that monitor well, before it hits the EAL. So we'd like to, I think what board member Anthony is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we all need to agree, and actually the regulators need to set what the sensitivity of tests should be across the board for all the different constituents that would apply to all monitor wells at Red Hill, including Red Hill Shaft, so we can get a better picture of what's happening, so that the degree of sensitivity of the test is consistent across the board.
Erwin, maybe I can chime in a little bit here.
This is Patrick, this is Ernie.
I'm sorry, Ernie, maybe I can chime in here and offer a little perspective. In my experience with the agency, when the agency sets a maximum contaminant level, an MCL, a legally defensible number that purveyors must comply with, those numbers take into account a number of considerations, one of which is health. But there are additional considerations such as feasibility, cost, and other things. Okay. What am I trying to get at here? As a general proposition, the MCL, when it is promulgated, is likely to be higher, a greater concentration than the existing health advisories. The toxicologist who developed and recommended the existing health advisory, it's a part per quadrillion concentration that Corinne alluded to, is extremely low. And we did not take into account the abilities of laboratories to measure or detect that concentration. What we took into account and prioritized were these substances' ability to adversely impact human health. And that adverse impact is most profound in the developmental sense. Okay. So developmental impacts to the fetus and whatnot. That is what really drove that number down to the part per quadrillion range. Okay, let me give you a real world example. Dioxin, a chemical called dioxin, is probably the most potent carcinogen that we regulate. The MCL, the legal amount that you are not allowed to exceed for dioxin, is 0.03 parts per trillion. That's 30 parts per quadrillion. Okay, so in my mind, that's about the most health protective and conservative MCL that we currently have for toxic substances. And now we're talking about a new class of emerging chemicals that seem to have potencies and toxicities at that level of exposure. So the agency is going to have to do two things. One, we're going to have to develop an MCL that takes into account not only the health impacts of these substances, but also the ability of people to detect and analyze them in a reproducible manner. and also the ability for water purveyors to remove these substances in a way that is feasible and economical.
Patrick,
And
could I
we have to
interrupt
take-
you really quickly? I'm sorry. I just am very mindful that we have only 9 minutes with you folks left. I believe I understand what you're sharing, and we understand that the action limits or the advisory levels at least are below the testing capacity. But I believe what Board Member Anthony was trying to convey along with our chief engineer is that the BWS is already testing at lower limits, and we have and we are able to do this. And so we know it's possible. And what we are asking, and perhaps what would be most helpful, Ernie, is for you to provide specific suggestions to EPA of what we are testing to and what we think might be helpful for everyone else to agree to at least have the Navy test to, so that our public can have more accurate information on the degree of the contamination, the size of the plume, and how it's spreading. Because at BWS, our concern is that we do not want to be in the same situation as the Navy. Because as Patrick, no, it wasn't Patrick, as the earlier speaker explained, due to how sticky these fuel substances are, if they get into our pipes, it's going to be a significant concern. And so we are testing to limits that we know are possible, and we would like to see if that's possible with the Navy. So Ernie, could you please share that?
Yeah, I would defer to Erwin, but I think we're going to use up our 9 minutes pretty quickly here. So what we can do is, what we're proposing is actually a same baseline for all tests. We're testing to the lowest limits. And the reason is not for human consumption of that water, but it's really to be an early indicator that something is happening in the underground aquifers so that we can prepare. Because we have so many drinking water wells in the area, we want to have as early advanced notice that something is moving, and perhaps over time, if we monitor it, we can see a trend upward that maybe we're at the outer fringes of a plume. Then maybe in a year, the whole plume could be right over the well or within the influence of the well. We want to have that early warning of what's happening.
Did I understand you to say that you have methods that are achieving lower limits of detection than the current EPA methods, and you would like to share those analytical methods with the agencies?
No, what I'm saying is, Patrick, TPHD, when we put 5,000 or 7,000 gallons of jet fuel into the aquifer, they were testing to just below the legal limit. And Erwin cranked up the sensitivity to start to look at, as an example, TPHD at the lowest possible limits to understand what was moving. I'm not the expert, Erwin is, but it's not helpful for when there is a known set of contaminants in the aquifer for us to say, oh, it's at non-detect. When what we did was we just didn't test low enough to understand what that meant and what that number was. Non-detect to the layman sounds like zero, like it doesn't exist. And so what we're asking, I think at this point we're begging, is to test to lower limits where possible so that we can understand what these contaminants are doing across an aquifer that doesn't have as much monitoring wells as we would like to really understand what the shape and the movement of these contaminants are.
So following up on the board member's suggestion, I think EPA and DOH would ask for the Board of Water Supply method for this, as well as the parameters, and send those suggestions to EPA and DOH.
Thank you.
Actually, Alice, I look forward to the next roundtable discussion. I think there's something coming up in January with some of the SMEs. So we can prepare something in a proposal. We would like the regulators to require the Navy to do this.
Yes, so we look forward to hearing your proposal. The meeting coming up in January is not one of the roundtable meetings, but is a groundwater subject matter expert meeting. So we think that is a perfect venue to have that proposal be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, any other members have questions? I think we've got 5 minutes.
I mean, I got a question for Roger. I just don't want to take up everybody's time.
Going once? Going twice?
Yes, you to the vice chair, if you have questions.
Kapua?
Well,
No, go ahead, Lehu. I see my time too.
can we go back to the green and white slide of the first deck, which was the 266 that you folks had come up with? I guess my question with that slide is, you know, you had made this comment that was, in my view, a little insensitive, saying that you live in Salt Lake and it was a new risk for you. But like, at 266, would you drink that water?
I drink. You know, that's a good question. I certainly think about that quite a bit. I don't want any jet fuel in my water to drink it.
Me either.
I would say.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
From a toxicity standpoint, my toxicologist side of me would say it's not a health risk. The toxicologists would say that below that based on those studies that they've done.
Roger, as a native Hawaiian, I would say that we have not had hydrocarbons in our water for 1,000 years, and don't like it to remain that way.
Bring it up.
Okay? Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you.
Okay, anything further on this? I know we've got testimony, but any other questions? If not, I'll move to testimony.
Chair, if I can just request the Department of Health or EPA members, if they can stay on as long as possible, just to hear some of the testimony.
Okay.
I'd just like to add, can we also request that they join the January meeting?
Yes.
Yep, I was.
Yeah.
Yep. I was going to close by thanking, both agencies, the EPA as well as the DOH. I'd like to bring us back to our common goal. That's something that I think our three agencies have in common, is to defuel, remediate, and ensure safe drinking water. And to that end, I hope that we'll be able to work together, and I'd like to invite the EPA and DOH to please stay on as long as possible. We've got a room full of people here. And please come back to our next BWS meeting, which I believe is on Monday, January 23rd, 2023. All right, I'd like to proceed. If there's nothing further, I'd like to proceed with testimony.
Sorry, Chair.
Go ahead.
If there is the testimony, we would like to receive it in writing so that we could reply as soon as possible. We are very apologetic. We did not schedule time after this to stay later than 4 o'clock. So I'm sorry, the Department of Health needs to drop off.
Okay, so we'll send you the recording for the meeting. We also have a bunch of written testimony we'll send to you. And please come back on January 23rd, 2023.
We're bringing announcements tomorrow to the Department of Health if you don't stay. Listen to the people.
All right, I'd like to move to, can we get order in the room, please? I'd like to move to public testimony now. As of 3:30 today, we have received 38 testimonies. We have 18 in writing or written only. We've got 12 who will be testifying remotely, I believe by telephone. Some of them with written testimony, others without. And then we also have we have 8 people here that will be testifying in person. I'd like to, first of all, thank everyone for sharing their opinions and their testimony with us, especially those who are here in person today. What I would like to do is I'd like to read for the record, since they took the time to submit written testimony. I'd like to read into the record the names of the people who submitted a written testimony, and then I'll move to in-person testimony. Okay, received written testimony. We have received from Tammy Evangelista. If I butcher any names, apologies in advance. Allison Domenden, Diane Fujimura,
So Alex,
Rosalind. Sorry, did you have something?
Hi,
Go ahead.
just we didn't get a chance to say before we needed to sign off that EPA also unfortunately won't be able to stay past 6 p.m. At our time. So we will look to receive the public testimony. Please send it to us at the same time as you send it to DOH, and we look forward to the invite to attend your January meeting.
And actually, Allison, if I may, I think it's really important for you folks to hear from the community members who have taken time out of their busy schedules in order to be here today to testify. And I appreciate that you'll be watching it online later, but if it would enable you folks to be able to participate in January, we would have to look at it with our entire board, but we could consider taking it in an earlier time so that you folks could more fully participate and be available to answer questions from the community members who've taken time out to
Thank
be.
you. Yes, we would appreciate that. And we will look to find a time that works mutually for DOH and EPA to be able to be present and answer the questions from the board and listen to folks' testimony. So we apologize for not being able to do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for participating, being here. To Ms. Smith, also the EPA for being here in person. We really appreciate it. All right, so in addition to the three names that I read into the record, I also have written testimony from Rosalind Cummings, Cheryl Burkhart, Pete Doctor, Dylan Ramos, Lorna Holm, Shannon Randolph, Patty Choi, Jennifer Valentine, Mary Menel Bell, Char Lewis, Catherine McLanahan. Thank you. Kristen Young, Maheshi Klopfer, Sherry Pollack, Noel Shaw. Thank you very much for submitting written testimonies. I'd like now to go to in-person testimony. Just as a reminder, when your name is called, please come here to the podium. Thank you very much for coming down to our building today. For all the people who submitted testimony, I know your lives have been affected by this situation. If you could, however, out of respect to everyone, if you could keep your testimony succinct to 2 minutes. We'll be giving you a warning. You'll hear the alarms go off. If you could do that, we really appreciate it. First on my list here is Amanda Fine.
Chair, may I, for the record, advise you that there are 9 in-person testimonies.
Good afternoon.
Excuse me. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Amanda Fight. I'm an active duty service member. I'm a mother of 2 small children who were poisoned in our Fort Island home and in their Fort Island CDC. I've also been an outspoken advocate for the health and safety. Thank you. For the health and safety of our children, my fellow service members, their families, and the local community. I'd like to state for the record that I do not appreciate you, DOH, or EPA using my children as your test dummies or your guinea pigs. Over the weekend, H&N broke the news about that PFAS was detected in our groundwater. And these results came from 20 and 27 December. I'd like to know, has any additional testing been conducted on PFAS since the 27th of December? Why hasn't the state or the EPA required the Navy to test individual homes for PFAS as part of their monthly monitoring process? Why did you wait so long to tell the Navy? I'm tracking that they didn't receive a letter until November 2022. During a House hearing on 19 July, Congressman Kai Kahele asked Navy Vice Admiral Randy Kreitz specifically about PFAS, as he asked many times before since the jet fuel leaked from a fire suppression line at Red Hill. Vice Admiral Kreitz said that he did not believe so. Again, that was on the 19th of July. Can you please confirm that the Navy did not know about the PFAS being in the groundwater? This question is for DOH, specifically Diana Felton. You've stated today that there is no health risk anticipated. You've also stated before that this is unprecedented. Please tell me how this is any different than what happened at Camp Lejeune. Are you tracking the harmful toxins and chemicals at Camp Lejeune? Are you tracking the entire graveyard of children who have died as a result of Camp Lejeune? Mr. Brewer, you repeatedly stated today that you could smell the fumes from where you lived in Salt Lake. If that were true, when did you first report and when did you first begin testing? I met with the administrator of the EPA in February 2022 when he came here to the island. That's when I first learned that the EPA did not regulate jet fuel in our water. I also had 2 calls with EPA Region 9. Corinne, I believe that you were part of that. You reviewed with me 4 certain criteria for the EPA to federally regulate TPH and JP5 in drinking water. I'd like you to explain that to the public, all 4 criteria. I'd also like you to answer, how many children must die? And how many children must suffer long-term health impacts before you regulate jet fuel and TPH in our drinking water? Thank you.
Members, at any time, you can ask questions, just let me know. Next up, we have Susan Picola Davis.
Good afternoon. Just for the record, I did send in written testimony of about 14, 15 pages, so I don't know.
We have them.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
In my Christmas outfit. Okay. So a lot of this is really for the Department of Health and for the EPA. So I'm going to practice for January so that I'm ready and it makes sense. In 2017, the EALs were increased. Mr. Lau's request to lower them back was refused by Bruce Anderson, Libby Char, and now Mr. Kenneth Fink has a chance to make it right. Why isn't the DOH even discussing and reconsidering the lower EALs? So in 2013, there's supposed to be a meeting. I think that maybe a paragraph needs to be provided to the Department of Health and the EPA so that they know what they're coming here for, rather than razzle dazzle us with a lot of time on presentations that a lot of us here already know because we're educated. Regardless of the calculation corrections, Mr. Brewer, how can you feel confident that these numbers would support contamination early enough to prevent more contamination to the aquifer? These numbers do not seem to set off alarms. To the Department of Health, was the Department of Health aware of Navy discarding samples? Did the Department of Health know before and agree with that, or not know until after? And was there any discussions pertaining to that? I attached pages 4 through 13 of the DOH HEER Technical Guidance Manual, Section 9, which hasn't been updated since 21, with specific sections that they need to reread. Or maybe here knows and the department doesn't. And lastly, on page 14 and 15 is a letter that was sent on December 8th to Mr. Lau in response to the BWS November 30th and December 5th letters regarding Red Hill. And one part of the response was that EPA and DOH will encourage the Navy, blah, blah, blah. We will also encourage the Navy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying that you need to be active. You're not going to encourage the Navy. You're the ones in charge. Tell them what to do. DOH, EPA, regulators, that's your job. Thank you. Good.
Okay, next on the list, we have Mr. Dave Mullinix.
Chair, Mr. Mullins had to go feed the meter, so if we could put him at the end and just keep going through the list.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Next is Kimmer Horst.
Hi there, Board, EPA, and the Board of Water Supply. My name is Kimmer Horson. I'm a 10-year Army combat veteran. I'm also a social work student at Hawaii Pacific University. In my third year, I wrote a paper on the Red Hill crisis here, the Navy Red Hill. So I know where all the aquifers are. I know where all the points are and the contamination, and I studied it. So I second what they're saying. The numbers, okay, we got the numbers, but there's still the fact that there's neglect, and that's got to be addressed, and that has to be addressed with the Navy. I know the toxicologists, they said they had 20 years in the EPA, and that's great. We need people long-term. We don't need politicians. We don't need Navy admirals coming and treating this as their duty station. They can just come here, pollute the water, I don't know, detonate bombs, pollute our INA, and then leave. We don't want to foster that environment. We want to talk to when they're incoming, say, this is our land, this is our water. You take care of, you tell your men, you tell your women, your servicemen and women, or whoever, the fire department, whoever works on, has these federal contracts on the bases where these aquifers are at, you know, you take care, you don't spill this FFF stuff, you don't neglect the land, you take care of the land while you're here, because we're here for the long term, the locals are. Also, the military will probably be here longer. Also, the personnel are being affected now. That is not excusable. When I was stationed in Germany, it was like Nazi green. They enforced us military to take care of the land. We had to pick up every bullet, every little detonation. We had to clean up. And I don't know why, but somehow in the United States, we can just crap on the locals here. We can just crap on the sovereign Hawaiian Kingdom people here because they were overthrown or something. I don't know what the attitude is. It's kind of a racist attitude, and I don't like it. We need to clean up after ourselves here. We need to get in those admirals and make these guys accountable. Like she said, you guys are the ones. We are the ones, right? And I see that you guys are mostly women, and they don't like to listen to women. But you know what? You guys are the mothers of the land. We're gonna take care. We're gonna make them listen. There's gonna be more marches. There's gonna be more more people coming up and rising up, because this is ridiculous now. This is getting into our water, drinking water. And I don't care if it's not drinking water, it's still water. There's an aquifer underneath it. It can spread to the other aquifers, and that's not good. Okay, mahalo.
Thank you, Ms. Carson. Next we have, and if you would like to submit written testimony hereafter, you're able to do that. Next, we have Mr. Alfred Medeiros.
We gotta show visualization. What's happening? All my Alfred Calcahono Medeiros. I'm only born and raised in Hawaii. I lived in Red Hill when I was a kid. So this is considered PFAS, right? This is considered fuel. This is the sediment that Mr. Bureau was talking about. So let's go mix that up. This is what we're doing to our people over here. Anybody want to help me with this? Because I don't think you guys get this. And you guys got to understand what we're doing to each other, right? Now, my presentation was meant for DOH and EPA because I wanted to show them this is what they're doing to the people. The water don't look clear, does it? Even in a yellow container like this. This is the sediment they're talking about. They're saying it's algae. It's not. That's toxins that they're put a whole list on there about. Would you like to try some? You're from the EPA, on behalf of EPA. No? Neither do us. Neither do the children. But I'll do that for you. Because we're living here. So the day we die and our future generations are going to carry on. This is what's happening to us. See, what I hear from Department of Health is excuses. There's no transparency. There's no accountability. You guys are lacking presence in these meetings that are very important to the people of Hawaii. The Department of Health is now called the Department of Harm, because I wish you guys were as much active as you guys were during the COVID time as it is during the fuel being poisoning our water.
Yes.
You guys regulated so many things for COVID, but yet you guys are still letting people drink the water and still downplaying it as if it's nothing. We are affected. The people, their own people, the US Navy poison are being affected. The children are able to live a normal life. That's why we fight. The news has been downplaying it, saying when a couple hundred came out on Saturday, over 2,000 plus came and walked the streets. There will be more. I promise you, there will be more. And if we have to go to the front doors of the Department of Health, we will do that. If we got to go to the EPA's places, we will do that. If we got to go to people's homes, we will do that. This is our home. This is where we come from. This is where we will lay and rest for the rest of our lives. That aquifer is like our heart. It pumps and pumps, but it spreads through our whole body. You cannot say it's only affecting one small area when it can go all the way west to Waianae, all the way east to Hawaii Kai. People need to understand this, and that's why you got to see the visualization of what reality is. You don't want this in your water. Then why should we have it in our water? I say mahalo to the Board of Water Supply for all you guys are doing. Mahalo to Ernie Lau for standing up and speaking up and leading the march as you did. I appreciate all of you guys here, because now we know and we see firsthand that the Department of Health and EPA are the wrong. The Navy, along with them, work hand in hand as the HEVA that is in Hawaii. We need to stop it now. There needs to be resignations from those people at Department of Health. They need to stand down. Mr. Brewer is a veteran from the Navy, so I get it why he's so adamant of downplaying everything. I believe her name was Diana. Diana Felton was sending out letters saying, do not test, do not let the people test. Why is that? Because she knows firsthand that our water was poisoned. They need to be more transparent, or they need to step down from their positions and let people who actually care about Hawaii, because that's what their name is, Department of Health, but they're only causing more harm. We don't need to do any more testing. The people here are evidence to what actually happened. No matter what you guys do and test, they're going to downplay it, unfortunately. Even when Na'alehu was telling them what to do, they couldn't even get that through their head. They're still trying to beat around it and say something else. He had to reiterate and reiterate and reiterate. We're doing this 1 year later, and 1 year later, too late. Besides draining the tanks, they need to be removed. I could go on and on about my feelings, but first things first, the people need to be protected and cared for. They're suffering. People are hurting. Children are hurting. Just because you don't see it now, 20 years from now, what are you going to do? Put out a commercial at Camp Lejeune? That's what's going to happen. That's the reality. So mahalo for you guys' time. This is the pure reality of what's happening. So Department of Health needs to do something. So does the EPA. Or else you guys have no position here at all. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Keone DeFranco. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Aloha mai kako. I'm here in support of everyone in this room and directing my energy to those that left. We've been fighting this battle for decades at this point, and we're still coming back to just trying to talk about testing, talk about this, talk about that. You have no place here. This is the second meeting in the last 30 days. When the people begin to speak, everyone leaves. Everyone leaves the room because they're scared of us, because they understand the truth of what's going on here. And it's HEVA. There's poison in our water. These presentations, you took up the entire time telling us that there's nothing wrong with the water, but our people are sick. The people in this room are sick. Their children are sick. So what are you doing here? You're not solving the problems, and you're withholding the truth from us. I'm here specifically to ask that the EPA and DOH demand that the Navy provide full access to all records for every single AFFF system using PFAS in Hawaii. How much has been stored, how much has been discharged, and how much remains within these systems. Also here to ask your support in demanding that the Navy release the tapes showing the discharge of PFAS last week. The people need to see what happened. You're withholding crucial evidence to us, and also request that you add civilian oversight directly to the Joint Task Force Red Hill. It's completely unacceptable that people like Ernie Lau did not even know there was a leak happening for over 6 hours. This is exactly why we have been asking for a year for an actual place at the table. We need to be there when these decisions happen, when these spills occur, because we need to protect ourselves. Because as we see, we're by ourselves on this island. You know, when people are telling me on video, the sun is setting. The sun is setting, it's because you're on occupied territory. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. And if you're not going to stand up to the plate, let the people of Hawaii stand up and take care of our people, of our water, and our next 7 generations, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to fight to the last aloha aina, and we expect immediate results in what was requested today. Mahalo nui.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Mia Lisa Otis. Afternoon.
Aloha. Thank you guys so much, Board of Water Supply, for everything you do. And thank you for sticking around, because I'm sure the other people won't listen or, read the tape. But we want transparency. We know we have to do these stupid show and tells because they're treating us like we're stupid. They're being so nonchalant. It's so disgusting. They need to stop hiding behind the film of deceit, a film of jet fuel and poison. They need to take their muzzles off and stop acting like puppets and reading their scripts and start talking, because we won't stop until you do. You're supposed to be protecting the people of Hawaii. I know you think you're doing your jobs, your occupations, and you're getting paid for it, but you're occupying our welfare. So the buck stops here. Thank you. Mahalo.
Next, we have Christina Baer. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I represent 800 and counting people who were affected by the Red Hill water contamination. I came here in support of my clients who are going to testify, and I had no anticipation of testifying myself, but I couldn't help myself. I have to respond to what was said, and some of the words in particular. One was this notion of non-detect. It is, I just wholeheartedly agree that it's incredibly dangerous. Last year, when I came for the first time, I held a little town hall, and I looked at these lists and lists that my clients were showing me of non-detects, where they said, well, this is my house and I'm getting a non-detect, so that must mean that my house is safe. And at the time, people really thought that their house was safe because they got a non-detect. I want to be really clear about what those non-detects meant. They hadn't even tested for diesel. They only had tested for total organic compounds. So the vast majority of the tests were non-detect, and everybody thought that they were safe. Then we later learned that those tests were destroyed, that the samples were destroyed before they were ever tested for diesel. That means that our clients and these families never learned what was in their water. So a question that I have, and I know that the relevant folks are no longer here, but as y'all ask them questions next week, I want to know, did they know about these test results that were thrown out? Did they give them permission to throw them out? And why is it that we are not actually making sure that these houses are safe? Where is the current testing of the houses? I do not believe that those houses are safe. We've forced people to move back into the houses that made them sick, and they got sick again because they never changed out the water heaters. They never tested for the air sampling. They never scrubbed the air. They never replaced any pipes. And now when they do testing, they only test for the cold water and not the hot water. And so they're missing the contaminants that are here right now. So I come in solidarity for the people who are affected. And when they say no long-term health risk, that's exactly what they were saying when I was here for the first time a year ago. No long-term health risk. I represent 800 people who say otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Lacey Quintero, followed by Dave Mullins.
Hello, I also submitted a written testimony, but it was probably not on your sheet, so. Anyway, I have a lot that I wanted to say specifically to Department of Health and the EPA and how cowardly for them to leave, really. Okay, Board of Water Supply, thank you so much. This whole water situation has been very traumatic and has destroyed my sense of trust and safety in everything and everyone. Thankfully, you represent the only organization, besides our lawyer, who I can actually still trust, so thank you for that. For the Department of Health specifically, I could just go rounds and rounds specifically with Diana Felton, because she'll get up there and sing song how great everything is and we're doing a great job, everyone, like we did a great job. No, okay, this is not a time to shake hands and congratulate yourselves. This is not the time. The truth is they failed, continue to fail. And I don't know what the EPA is doing. They're just often doing whatever, monitoring. I'm not really sure, but they're not protecting us, neither of them. And what I want to know is when these EALs are being considered, okay, I saw the portion of Mr. Brewer, his slide where he said it was a certain weight amount. And all I could think was, my 3-year-old didn't even weigh half of that. Why are we just picking a magic number to set these EALs? The majority of the military population, we have children 0 to 5. 0 to 5. They're gonna all weigh less than that magic number that they pulled out of a hat. And okay, so the weight is one thing. What about the pregnant women? What about the breastfeeding women? The babies who are breastfeeding? These exposures are on and on and on. And at what point do we stop being so dumb and blind? Look at 2014. I have a lot of friends who were poisoned in 2014 and we're all forgetting about them. Why aren't we studying the effects? Because I can tell you they're not okay. Their kids are still having seizures, rashes, vomiting. I could go on and on. Autoimmune disorders. There is a study. They're just not opening their eyes to see it. And here we are, study number 2. Open your eyes or you won't see it. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Dave Mullenix, good afternoon.
Aloha, Kako. I really want to say stuff to EPA again. Department of Health, they're not here. So the best thing I'm gonna say to you folks is thank you. You know, without you, we would all be in jeopardy. We just, you know, you're doing your job and they haven't been. The military, they really just don't care about us. They've contaminated all across the United States, from Camp Lejeune, in fact, all around the world. The military is the biggest polluter on our planet, and they don't clean up their stuff. They walk away. They hide it. They pretend it didn't happen. Once it's detected through whistleblower or people getting poisoned, then they keep denying. To get to the point we have no other choice, then they say it's not that big a deal. They cannot be trusted in any way, shape, or form. And so it's you folks, the EPA, and the Board of Health. I mean, yeah, those folks, that's their job, and you're the only ones doing it. And so we just want to thank you profusely for what you've been doing. I said, all choked up from her testimony. I'm sorry, but this is essential, and I really want to thank you for just pressuring them to, you know, put their feet to the fire. You guys can't stop ignoring us. And that was just, we didn't put scheduled time for questions. How absurd, how rude, how condescending to the only people who have really been fighting for us all these years. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, and we're with you. Hello.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else here to testify that's in person?
Can I go again?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lyle Hosoda. I was looking up at the wall at how far I go back, and it went Jemiah, Hayashida. So I've become the oldest guy in the room. I beat almost. but I have had the honor and privilege of being a part of this community for all my life. And I also have the privilege as an attorney to pick and choose at this point which clauses and which people I get involved with. And I have chosen to get involved in this battle, to battle with you for all of those who have been affected and been afflicted and have been injured by this situation. I am so proud of the process and what you folks have done. And there's a lot more work to do though. Get plenty more work to do. But I just wanted to tell you that I stand before and I stand behind each of those that have been affected. And I thank you for your time.
Excuse me, could you spell your name, please?
You have to ask me to spell my name. H-O-S-O-D. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, you guys can hang around. We've got a bunch of remote testimony if you want, if you'd like to stay. But thank you very much for coming in person today. It does mean a lot.
I would like to say.
Absolutely, please.
Yeah, can you come up here, please, and identify yourself? Spell out your name too.
I have it already, I got it.
Oh, okay.
Hi, everyone, and all of you who've offered your testimonies today. My name is Dominique Smith. I am with the EPA. I'm the Environmental Justice Community Engagement Coordinator, and I really wanted to be with you all today to hear from you directly face to face. And it is very moving, everything that you all have said. I know I'm probably one of the youngest people in the room and new to Red Hill, but I want to work with you and I want to incorporate all of the feedback that you've given to us and report it back to EPA, and I will do that. I've taken multiple notes on everything that's been shared today, and I will be sharing it with everyone at EPA that was not able to attend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. You're a brave soul. Okay, let's see, for remote testimony.
Sure. I know people have been waiting a long time to testify, and I'm just wondering if we could give like a 3 or 4 minute bathroom break.
Mr. Maria, do we have any remote testimony on this item? I do show a list.
Yes, Chair. We have 11 scheduled testifiers waiting to provide testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Susan Gorman Chang,
Yes.
Tara Rojas, and Cassandra Chi have been admitted into the session. Testifiers, please turn on your cameras and remain on mute until we call your name. We will call you one at a time to provide your testimony. After the chair recognizes you, please unmute your microphones and state your name, spell your first and last name for the record. You will then have 2 minutes to provide your testimony. You'll be given a 1-minute reminder to wrap up your comments. Susan Gorman Chang, please unmute your microphone and wait for the board chair.
Aloha, Ms. Gorman Chang. Please go ahead and start.
Okay, mahalo for taking my testimony. I do want to thank Erwin and Ernie and the whole board. I feel like you're the only ones that have our backs. And I also submitted written testimony, but I didn't hear my name. So my comments were for Roger Brewer. His level of 266 parts per billion for the TPH. I just want to ask him where he got that, if anybody else is using that, and if it's been peer reviewed, because in 2016, the Board of Water Supply paid for a study from 2 different independent labs. One of them found the environmental action level at 210 parts per billion. The other one was 162 parts per billion. And we know at 100 parts per billion, you can smell and taste it. And then also Minnesota, that state recognizes 200 parts per billion, and Massachusetts is 200 parts per billion. So, my question to him is who else is using this 266 parts per billion? It has it been peer reviewed? And his sheet that I know some of the board members asked him about,
it gives me absolutely no confidence in his calculations. I mean, he's saying the 266 was from an error corrected on a spreadsheet, but then they were using, 500 updated from a previous 1980 document based on mistranslation of the Soviet Union study in 1940. That's just ridiculous. And then at the bottom, it says final JP-5 EAL 266, lowest of toxicity and taste and odor. That is incorrect because we know it can be tasted and smelled at 100. The other thing I wanted to ask, comment on with Roger was the action level, assuming 176 pounds. And as Lacey said earlier, how many kids are 176 pounds? That is not accurate. That is not an honest way to do those type of studies. And also, I don't see any scientific evidence for him to say that there's no long-term health impacts. I felt like he was just trying to sow doubt. I think he's peddling in doubts and lies, and he's taken a page from the tobacco companies because he kept saying something to think about. It could be a lab error. Some of those labs don't clean their equipment in between samples. So I wanted to ask him, are you using a lab that actually doesn't clean your equipment between samples? I mean, then get another lab, right? And then he kept saying, oh, there could be other sources other than Red Hill. Well, please track those toxins down. Please track those sources down. You're the Department of Health. You need to be tracking those things down, not just like making excuses and pointing your fingers, at everyone else. So I'm very disappointed that they didn't stay to answer our questions. And I hope we can do this again in January. And I just, again, really thank the Board of Water Supply for doing what you do. You're the only ones that have our back, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And members, at any time, if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you very much, Ms. Gorman Cheng, for your time today. Next up, or am I supposed to, or Mr. Maria, are you gonna call them up, or should I call them up?
Tara Rojas, please unmute your microphone and wait for the board chair.
Aloha, Mr. Rojas. Thank you very much for providing testimony today. Please proceed.
So aloha, I'm Tara Rojas, and mahalo nui to the Board of Water Supply. Again, as everybody has said, for standing up for what is pono for Hawaii. And my three main points to the EPA and the Department of Health are as follows: that there should be three requirements to be on the EPA and the Department of Health. One, common sense. Common sense triumphs any technical knowledge that they were just rattling off in their presentations, just giving numbers, which are really just basically desensitizing people to accept higher and higher numbers of pollutants and contaminants in the water, which is just really heavy, Why is the lowest number considered an interim number, So I don't understand that. The lowest number should be the rule of thumb, should be permanent. And number two, requirement to be on the EPA and Department of Health is actual concern for health. They state it, yet all I could see was ego. All that what we saw today was just ego. Whereas that one man, he just seemed so surprised that, or she seems surprised and asked the VOW if they had a better testing system than then. I mean, that's just ego-based. And if there is one, that should be welcomed and not looked at something as, oh, you mean you have something better than us? That doesn't make sense. So another display of ego rather than concern for health. It was, they just couldn't, answer the questions. Like the Board of Water member had asked them and let them know that, there was zero contamination for thousands of years. And I was so happy to hear that, actually hearing, somebody saying that to these two main regulating agencies. So this should be on their mind, not anything else. Yeah, so common sense, triumphing technical knowledge, concern for health, triumphing ego, and then finally, and by the way, and I just was really surprised to see that they slinked off, basically is the word. They slinked off and, just, it's not concern for health. They're not Department of Health, like how the testifier earlier person said, Department of Harm, Department of Health. Should be Department of Health, concern for health. And finally, the last one is the requirement to be trustworthy and honest. Trustworthy and honest, because all we saw today and these years have been compromising with the Navy, lies, deceit, like back end or hidden negotiations, and doing everything but what they're supposed to be doing, which is regulating and making sure that our VAI and our AINA are safe for the people, for the community, and what would just make them, move a little quicker and maybe have them on the side of common sense, concern for health and trust and honesty if their water was the one affected. So just mahalo nui for y'all, and I really hope that they do listen and they take notes of these testimonies and this information, and just to do what's pono, and if not, to please resign. Mahalo.
Thank you, Ms. Rojas, for your testimony today.
Chair, our next testifier is Cassandra Chi. Ms. Chi, please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and wait for the board chair.
Aloha, Ms. Chi. Thank you very much for providing testimony today. You may proceed.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Cassie Chi, and I just want to say thank you to Ernie Lau, Erwin Kawata, and the Board of Water Supply. It was extremely disrespectful for the EPA and the DOH to walk out, and I submitted my comments written, but I'll just read it for the record here in hopes that they do look at this later. So this is to the EPA and the DOH. There's no level at which PFAS or jet fuel in our water feels safe to me. I have more anxiety about getting sick every time I turn on my tap than I do about catching COVID. I'm appalled at the lack of transparency and response by both departments when at least 1,300 gallons of AFFF have been spilled. As Ernie Lau and the Board of Water Supply have demanded, we need all the information about how much AFFF has been stored at the Red Hill facility and where it is now. Your lack of response is putting us all in danger, but especially those who are dependent on the Navy's water system and at Kapalina Beach homes. You need to immediately inform the larger public about the serious health risks they face while living around Kapukaki and Pu'uloa. And these are my questions for the EPA and the DOH. When will you let the public know about the results of the groundwater test after the AFFF spill? And what plans do you have to prevent more people from being poisoned and to protect our VAI and restore the contaminated AINA and VAI? Mahalo for the time today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chi.
Chair, Meredith Wilson, Brandon Bees, and Shard Garcia Ka'ai have been admitted into the session. Testifiers, please turn on your camera and remain on mute until we call your name. Ms. Wilson, please unmute your microphone and wait for the board chair.
Aloha, Ms. Wilson. Thank you very much for providing testimony today. You may proceed.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, folks, and thanks so much for your time today. My name is Meredith Wilson, and I was forever changed by simply being a resident on Hickam Air Force Base for 5 years. Using the water at my home made me very ill, and I've spent the last year battling just to become a normal person again. And I agree that the presentations before were just simply things that most of us already knew. And I believe it was really shameful and disrespectful that they didn't stay. They knew that public testimony was a part of this, and it was the majority of what we really wanted to get to. And mostly the questions that your board wanted to ask. That's really what this is about sharing and coordinating and in close coordination, that thing that we hear all the time. It's not about the presentations, it's coordination. And I didn't see a lot of that happen. So I'm really, really disappointed. Which is more of the same feeling I've been feeling for a whole year, a lot of disappointment. Sorry, just really fired up. I'm directing most of my questions to the Hawaii Department of Health representatives. The current EAL for TPH memo that was revised on April 20th states that the action levels are anticipated to be protective of human health under the normal use of tap water in the absence of other contaminants in the water, based on the chemical makeup of JP5 jet fuel assumed in the models. So a few things here that I wanted to ask Dr. Brewer. The reference document for normal use is from 2017 and only considers oral consumption. BWS wrote a letter in 2018 urging to include inhalation and absorption. This exact scenario played out for us, my family, and thousands of others last year when we showered in toxic water, bathed our children and pets in it, and so many other daily chores. What should our safety factor be for toxic effects, our EAL, when those routes of exposure are actually considered? I urge this team, the DOH, to use the precautionary principle instead of a reactionary one. Just because something has degraded in groundwater doesn't mean that it's still not harmful. It should not be there. And speaking of other contaminants, we have yet to hear from the Navy or from the DOH what the chemical makeup, including additives, of that JP5 was. Dr. Brewer mentioned during a WRRC seminar on April 1st that antifreeze, or fuel system icing inhibitor, was confirmed to be in the Red Hill shaft where our drinking water was being drawn from. What is the carbon range breakdown, additives, and any cleanup materials like Simple Green or other surfactants found in the samples that DOH sent off to the mainland to be analyzed? This is now a year overdue. We should know what was in that. And so this would alter what that EAL should be, that other contaminants should be when you're considering an EAL. This completely disrupts what the definition of an EAL should be when we're talking about creating that number. So I just really wanted to ask that to Dr. Brewer. It's really disturbing that they're not here. And I also just echo again what Board Member Anthony said. When you report a non-detect and you repeat that back to a resident, and they may have gotten the value of a 110 part per billion versus a 226 part per billion. I think this has to do with maybe the Navy has rapid tests versus the BWS versus the DOH has different kinds of rapid testing methods. And so that is just a bigger discussion. So I don't know what needs to be done for the January meeting, but I'm befuddled. I'm just really, really disappointed. And I just appreciate everything that you guys do. Mahalo to Manager Lau for your steadfast leadership and for all those who continue to be the hands and feet of this movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Chair, our next testifier is Brandon Bees. Mr. Bees, please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and wait for the board chair.
Aloha, Mr. Bees. Thank you very much for providing testimony today. You may proceed.
Aloha to everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for your time in advance. My name is Brandon Bees. I'm a graduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa with a focus on groundwater research. I'm here testifying as a private individual today. I'll talk about my concerns regarding the health of the community and the transparency of the Navy. I wish to voice my opinion on the recent fire suppressant spill of Red Hill and show my support for the setting of environmental action levels. I recently worked on an outreach project with a class of high school students from Radford High School, where we created a website that offers background information to the public on Red Hill, tools where to find where their water originates, who to contact if they have been exposed, health effects, and testimonials from the students. Understanding firsthand how these children and their families have been affected in their testimonies was just horrible. They spoke about the burns and the hair loss that their families experienced. No one should have to experience that, especially the keiki. This recent fire suppressant spill of aqueous film forming foam, also known as AFFF, contained toxic perfluoral and polyfluoral alkyl substances, or PFAS, also known as forever chemicals. These chemicals received their name due to their resistance in breaking down in the natural environmental conditions. This is just much worse than solely the jet fuel reaching a water supply, if that has happened, since now that they have been mixed. I'm very concerned about the short-term and long-term effects that this will have on the community. Some of the health effects that this suppressant can cause are asthma, child development issues, and fertility problems. Hawaii News Now reported that the Navy does not know the cause of the spill, and that they also reported there's no evidence of contamination of the drinking water. I'm only concerned about the Navy's transparency due to the previous ways that they've handled these spills. People's health is and has been at stake for a very long time due to this. The Department of Health is requiring a very detailed report of the events that led to the spill and also the remaining locations of AFFF in the Red Hill facility. Although, as mentioned before, I am worried about the miscommunication of information that is vital to the community. The knowledge whether fire suppressant foam has entered the groundwater or not is very important to how we'll move forward in addressing this situation. Mahalo for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bees, for your testimony today.
Chair, our next testifier is Shard Garcia Ka'ai. Ms. Ka'ai, please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and wait for the board chair.
Aloha, Ms. Garcia Ka'ai. Thank you for providing testimony
Aloha.
today. Please proceed.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Sade and I'm born and raised here on Oahu. You know, I'm first of all, I'm kind of disappointed and upset that the EPA and the DOH didn't consider staying or like planning accordingly to hear from the people. But mahalo to you guys for being here. Like everybody else said, you know, I echo everyone's here, what they had to say, and I just had to make it a point to come and share that we the people, this is not okay with us. Like Brother Al said, you know, we are from here and our children gotta grow up here, and a lot of hell has been done to our vibe, but this cannot be fixed and it's not okay. So mahalo for fighting for us against these entities, and we are here to fight alongside you guys for our water. So mahalo nui.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ka'ai, for providing testimony today.
Chair, Danielle Espiritu, Healani Sonori Pale, and Gina Hara have been admitted into the session. Ms. Espiritu, please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and wait for the board chair.
Aloha, Ms. Espiritu. Thank you very much for providing testimony today. Please proceed.
Aloha. First, mahalo nui to everyone. I just want to echo the comments that were made before. My testimony pertains primarily to the EPA and Hawaii Department of Health. And I just want to mahalo folks here for your, just commitment to everything. Kalamai, I gotta turn off my live feed. Okay. Aloha mai kako. My name is Danielle Espiritu. I'm a resident of Waimalu in the Mokua or district of Ewa. And I'm testifying to express serious concern tied to the EPA and Hawaii Department of Health environmental action levels, especially considering the recent release of approximately 1,300 gallons of AFFF and the detection of these forever chemicals in the groundwater at Kapukaki. As we know, the Moko of Ewa, as well as many of our island valleys, are filled with freshwater springs that bring water up from the aquifer into our streams, out to the surrounding environment, and eventually into the ocean. It's not a matter of if these chemicals will surface, but when. The EPA and the Department of Health need to begin regular monitoring of groundwater sources surrounding the Red Hill facility, including water from Halava Stream, as well as water being discharged from the Pearl Harbor wastewater treatment plant. These sources must be checked regularly for PFAS and data must be made publicly available. In addition, the EPA and DOH must begin an educational campaign to inform the public of the health risks of these chemicals. We're talking about cancer exposure, long-term illnesses, and reproductive issues that will last centuries, and people have no idea. The 93,000 people on the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam water line were not informed by the Navy when they were first poisoned last year. Samples from the 2020 and 2021 showed detections of PFOA and PFOS that are hundreds of times above the current EPA advisory limits. People drinking from this water system are potentially still being poisoned, and no one is warning them. The Navy has chosen not to be forthright with the information at the expense of their own families, as well as civilians relying on their water system. And yet the EPA and DOH is allowing it to happen. These departments exist to protect the health of our people in Aina. And so why are they not forcing the Navy to inform the public and these families about this risk? The Navy has failed to come clean about things as basic as disclosing to the public the chemicals held in its underground facility at Kapukaki. This is critical to our survival. Families who have been poisoned need this information in order to seek proper treatment. And entities like the Board of Water Supply must know what they are looking for in order to track and mitigate the spread of fuel and harmful chemicals in our groundwater, and ensure that they don't enter our public water distribution systems. The EPA and DOH are supposed to exist to protect us. It is not time to be afraid or to shield the Navy with your silence. The health and future of our islands literally depends on your boldness and the decisions you make right now. With this, the Department of Health must update its environmental action levels. Your koleana, your responsibility and the privilege that you have to sit in the position that you do is to protect the health of our people both now and into the future. In spite of newly updated EPA guidelines, the current DOH environmental action levels for PFOA and PFOS forever chemicals are still thousands of times higher. The DOH should be taking a much more cautious approach, especially considering that these chemicals bioaccumulate and pose serious and fatal threats to Aina Vayan people. As someone whose ohana once fished and gathered from Pu'uloa, and whose family swam in and ate from the streams that fed into her, and as one whose livelihood, cultural and spiritual practices and community depend on the springs in valleys surrounding Kapukaki, I implore you, don't wait. You need to act now. And a failure to do so is nothing short of being complicit to genocide. Mahalo nui.
No.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Spiritu, for providing testimony today.
Chair, our next testifier is Heolani Sonora Pale. Ms. Pale, please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and wait for the board chair.
Aloha, Ms. Sonora Pale. Thank you very much for providing testimony today. Please proceed.
Thank you. Aloha Board of Water Supply Chair Andaya, Vice Chair Sprout, and members. Mahalo nui for all you have done so far for the protection of our drinking water. Please do not stop asking the questions you have been asking. Mahalo to Naalehu and Kapua and Ernie for demanding at least some answers and clarification on the presentation by the Department of Health today. After watching that presentation by the Department of Health, I felt sick to my stomach. It was awful, and it makes me wonder, as a mother, whose interests they are working on behalf of. The U.S. Navy needs to shut down the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility permanently and defuel the tanks immediately. The latest spill of PFAS speaks to the fact that we have no idea what is being stored there and what the true condition of the facility is. The U.S. Navy also needs to release the video of the most recent spill. This year, the only thing that's worked has been pushing the Navy to do the right thing. It's been over a year, and that's what we basically learned. The Navy will not respond to letters of encouragement or even pleas to do the right thing. They will not put the health and safety of our people, of the people of Oahu first, unless leveraged to do so. The only leverage that the Board of Water Supply has is access to clean water. Access to clean water needs to be cut off to the U.S. Navy until such time as they defuel the tanks, release all the well testing data and video of the recent spill and past spills we were never notified about, provide sufficient help to all affected families, including non-military families. And they also need to start cleaning up the Red Hill facility and the surrounding areas and reduce their operations. And I want to just say that I 100% agree with Danny that we need the data. As a head of household, it's important for us for our families, for people who make decisions for our families, to have that data so that we can make decisions that is right for our families and whether or not we want to drink the water or not. So we need that data as soon as possible. So I just want to just reiterate that you have to use your leverage to push the US Navy to do the right thing. They won't do it unless you do that. And I also want to support the points that were made by Hawaii Sierra Club and Oahu Water Protectors. Mahalo.
Thank you very much for providing testimony today.
Aloha, Chair. This will be our last testifier on this item. Gina Hara, please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and wait for the board chair.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Hara, for providing testimony today. You may proceed.
I haven't heard what the last testimonies were because we can't listen to them simultaneously. I wanted to ask, why is Roger Brewer the only person from the Department of Health able to decide the EAL when so many thousands of people disagree with him? I would like an investigation regarding whether Roger Brewer, as a former Navy person, has a conflict of interest regarding the people of Hawaii and the people of Halawa. I would like to ask also that the Department of Health conflict of interest, as they are part of the AOC with the Navy, and that they mostly meet with the Navy and the EPA, and they just talk to each other and they're not talking to the community. And even during FTAC, they do not talk to the real people two-way communication, that these conflicts of interest should be taken in consideration with regards to determining whether our water is safe or not. I want to encourage the Board of Water to go ahead and do your own studies and don't trust the Navy and the EPA, because in 2016, I remember that Roger Brewer and the Phoenix Grange raised the TPHD from 100 to 400 after 16,000 was the spike level in the Red Hill well number 15. Simultaneously, they tried to also cut off the amount of toxins tested from 68 to something like 10 at the protest of the Board of Water several times around, not just one time. So I want to encourage you to speak up and also to ask for remediation funds. Please ask for remediation funds that will be necessary with microorganism-based testing for the next 7 generations. Do not forget to ask for this when you please ask for your well funding. I would also like to mention that the PFAS is in Halawa's water test from 2020. I just found out about it actually recently in the Board of Water report. This is very shocking to us. And in Halawa, we found out we need an NSF tested water purifier. I didn't know about all this, but I just learned. I think that the EAL, you have to be careful because this is a cumulative measurement. It is not something like it goes away, it's a forever chemical. So when you weigh this, I don't think it's fair to have just Roger Brewer decide what the EAL is or MCL. These people, they do not have any skin in the game. It's more important to have a wide array of experts to comment on this such an important level. And I want to say thank you for speaking up and pursuing the details regarding this. We've been testifying on this subject for 8 years now. Please also note, I would like to put on the record that on Dark Waters, the Dark Waters movie, also the community there suffered from the Department of Health raising the EALs immediately after the PFAS spike. If you look at the movie, you will see what can happen to the DNA, and you can see what will happen to children when they are born. They are deformed. And the pregnant women have the same kind of looking babies. I don't want to take up any more time. I'm just so grateful that I was able to testify and that you brought Roger Brewer onto the camera. This is so important. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hara. Okay, members, I believe that brings us to the end of the board agenda today. If there's no other business, I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn. Wish you happy holidays.
Actually, Chair,
Yes.
I have one thing I'd like to add really quickly, please. I
Go
just
ahead.
I'd really like to mahalo everyone who testified today, both by sending in their mana'o in writing as well as, and especially for those who came in person and others who waited online to share their stories. I'm really grateful for everyone's time, for their aloha, and really for their resilience. And I want to apologize. I'm sorry that DOH and EPA left before you testified and we're not here to answer your questions, but I want to let you know that we at DOH, sorry, boy. We at BWS, let me be very clear, hear you. And we're doing our very best within our limited capacity to seek transparency, better information, and truth and justice even. And so as folks know, BWS, we're not the regulators, we are purveyors. And so we're doing the best that we can, but I also want to really mahalo and uplift the courage and hard work of Ernie and Erwin in particular. And finally, I'm not sure if Ms. Smith is still in the boardroom, but if she is, her work is about environmental justice. And so then she should understand the importance of sharing in the healing process. And also that DOH and EPA's behavior tonight likely compounded the trauma for all of those who have already been harmed. And so since she's been here, since she's heard firsthand how serious it is, please do better at our January meeting. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you for that, Vice Chair Stroh. Members, anything further? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.